Harrison Sterling walked into the Manhattan Family Court building, with his mistress clinging to his arm and a petition for primary physical custody in his hand. Blair Kensington smiled at my little girl, as if she had already picked out the curtains for the nursery she was planning to steal from me. I lifted Auden, pulled her tight against my chest, saved the last text message from my lawyer, and let them believe I had come alone. The courthouse hallway was too bright, too sterile, and far too quiet for the cruelty that had just crossed its threshold. Harrison was wearing a navy blue suit I had bought for him a few New Year's Eves ago. The one he claimed made him look like a man people could trust. Blair wore something cream-colored, soft and expensive. Her hair was swept over one shoulder, and the diamond ring on her right hand caught the fluorescent light every time she brushed Harrison's sleeve. They looked like a couple arriving for a pre-wedding photo shoot, not a custody hearing for a daughter he had ignored until taking her from me became a strategic asset. Auden squirmed in my arms and pressed a tiny fist against my collarbone. Blair's gaze dropped down to her. "Oh," she said, her voice so steeped in syrup it could rot your teeth. "She looks tired." Poor thing. A courthouse is no place for a baby. I looked at Harrison. "Then you should have withdrawn the petition." His jaw clenched, but Blair let out a breathy little laugh. "She'll have a much calmer life soon," Blair said. What she meant was that when the dust settled, she would get everything. My daughter, my home, my marriage, my last name, my postpartum body, my sleepless nights, my bank account, my sanity, and my grief. They had reduced it all to a stack of legal filings and expected me to just sign on the dotted line. Harrison stepped closer, dropping his voice so only I could hear. "Now, don't make this uglier than it needs to be, Sutton. You know you can't handle all this alone." I looked past his shoulder toward the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. Alone. He had built his entire case on that word. I had no family, he'd claimed. I had no stable income, he'd claimed. I had no emotional regulation, he'd claimed. I couldn't offer Auden a stable future. He forgot that I had spent months learning the difference between being abandoned and being alone. The former was what he had done to me. The latter was something I stopped being the second I stopped protecting him. My phone vibrated in my wool coat pocket. "Merritt. We're ready." I didn't smile. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind Harrison of the nights he never came home, the hospital discharge papers he never signed, or the lease on Blair's West Village apartment that he paid for while I was counting diapers and scoops of formula. I simply looked down at Auden, kissed her warm scalp, and walked right past them toward the courtroom. I heard Blair whisper, "Did she really come by herself?" "She came unprepared," Harrison replied. The first thing I had noticed about Blair Kensington that morning was her lipstick. Not the cashmere dress, not the blowout, not the carefully calculated angle at which she held Harrison's arm, as if she had rehearsed it in a mirror. Her lipstick was the exact same shade I had found on a wine glass left in my kitchen sink 6 months ago. That night, Harrison had called me paranoid. I was 7 months pregnant. My ankles were so swollen I could barely bend over, and I found the glass by the faucet. When I came home early from a prenatal appointment, there were 2 plates in the dishwasher, a fork with lipstick smudges on the tines, and the faint lingering scent of another woman's perfume in the air. Harrison had laughed when I asked him about it. "Sutton, you're just exhausted," he'd said. "Pregnancy brain is getting to you." That morning in court, Blair wore the same color, as if she wanted me to remember. And I did. I remembered everything. The courthouse smelled of industrial floor cleaner, burnt drip coffee, and nervous sweat. Parents sat on wooden benches with manila folders on their laps. Lawyers whispered near the security guards. A little boy in a dinosaur hoodie kicked his heels against a chair while his mother stared blankly at a wall, looking as though she were holding herself together by a single thread. I stood at the end of the corridor with Auden asleep in my arms, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket I had bought at the hospital gift shop because Harrison had forgotten the go-bag I'd packed. Her cheek rested against my sweater. Every breath she took was something tiny, damp, and real. She had no idea that 3 adults were about to sit before a judge to argue over who owned her. My lawyer, Merritt Caldwell, hadn't arrived yet. She had gone to file supplemental exhibits, the final pieces of discovery we had secured less than 12 hours prior. I had told her I could wait alone. Waiting didn't scare me anymore. I had waited, listening to the ringing of unanswered phone calls while I was in labor. I had waited through the nights Harrison said he had late client dinners, only to come home smelling of Blair. I had waited for him to magically turn into a father after Auden was born. Waiting had taught me one ultimate truth. People show you exactly who they are when they think you have no other options. Harrison had walked in at 8:42 a.m. I knew the exact time because I checked my phone the instant the atmospheric pressure in the hallway shifted. His presence used to have that effect on me before I understood the mechanics of it. The air in a room would grow heavier. My shoulders would tense. My thoughts would instantly organize themselves around his mood. If he was tired, I was quiet. If he was irritated, I walked on eggshells. If he was charming, I felt grateful. Now I merely noted the time. He had breezed through the metal detector first, handing his phone to the bailiff with impatient entitlement. Blair followed, walking with such airy lightness, she looked as though she believed the courthouse was beneath her, yet she clearly reveled in the attention. Harrison's attorney, Desmond Thorne, trailed behind them with a distressed leather briefcase, and the perpetual expression of a man who bills by the hour and enjoys making other people feel poor. Harrison spotted me and stopped. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker in his eyes. Surprise, discomfort, maybe guilt. Then Blair looped her arm through his, and the moment vanished. He stood taller. Sutton. Blair leaned forward, her eyes going wide as she looked at Auden. She's so tiny. I shifted Auden away just before Blair's manicured fingers could graze the blanket. Blair's smile tightened. I was just trying to be friendly. No, I said. You were trying to touch my daughter without asking. A woman sitting on the bench next to us looked up. Harrison's nostrils flared. Here we go. I haven't started anything, I replied. Blair held up a glossy paper shopping bag. We brought Auden something. A cashmere baby blanket. It's better than that one. Softer. I looked at the bag, then at her. She doesn't need anything from you. Sutton. Harrison's voice dropped into that specific, measured tone he used when he wanted to make me look hysterical. This is exactly what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? The hostility. The instability. The outright refusal to accept basic decency. Blair's smile returned. Small and practiced. I know this is hard for you, but we all have to think about Auden. The word we sounded soft, which only made it sharper. Harrison shifted his weight. Blair is part of my life now. She was part of your life when I was pregnant, I said flatly. His face shifted not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for me to see it hit. He hadn't expected me to say it out loud in public. Desmond Thorne stepped forward. Miss Sterling, I advise you not to make inflammatory accusations inside the courthouse. I turned to him. It's Miss Mercer now. Harrison let out a short sigh. You haven't legally changed your name back yet. I filed the paperwork last week. His eyes locked onto mine. It was the first crack of the morning. Blair recovered faster. Last names don't matter. What matters is a stable environment for Auden. I almost laughed. Apparently, stability meant showing up to family court with the other woman to try and take an infant from the mother who had slept next to her crib every single night since she was born. But I had promised Merritt I wouldn't give them anything they could use against me, so I just adjusted Auden's little knit cap. Harrison looked at my diaper bag. It was gray canvas, practical, and worn. In one side pocket was a bottle. In the other, folded medical records, immunization charts, and a flash drive sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. He didn't see any of that. He just saw an exhausted woman holding a baby. All right, you came alone, he said softly, putting on a mask of pity. Please don't make a scene. I know your father hasn't spoken to you in years. Your friends are tired of the drama. You quit your job. You don't have the support system you need. I felt Auden's fingers relax against my sweater. The hallway blurred, morphing into another room. Another night where Harrison had towered over me while I sat on the nursery floor, surrounded by unopened boxes of diapers. You can't think straight, he had told me. You need me. I had believed him then, because when you are sleep-deprived to the point of hallucination, a cage can look a lot like a sanctuary. Now, I just heard the legal strategy. No support, no money, no emotional stability, no chance. Blair leaned in closer, dropping her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. You don't have to lose everything today. Harrison is still willing to be generous. I looked at her hand resting on his sleeve. Generous with what? The marital assets he used to pay your rent? Harrison's face hardened. Careful. The word fell between us like an old threat. I had heard it before. Careful. When I asked why he put a new passcode on his phone. Careful. When I questioned a credit card charge for the Carlisle. Careful. When I sobbed after he missed Auden's first pediatrician appointment and he told me I was making fatherhood unpleasant for him. Careful meant stop before I punish you emotionally. Today, it meant nothing. Behind me, Merritt's heels clicked sharply against the linoleum. Sutton, she said smoothly. She wore a dark green suit and carried herself with a posture that inherently made aggressive men lower their voices. She didn't look at Harrison first. She looked at Auden, then at me. Are we all set? Yes, Desmond Thorne smirked. Merritt. Always with the theatrics of filing exhibits at the 11th hour. Merritt gave him a polite, icy look. Only when opposing counsel hides relevant facts. Harrison's eyes narrowed. What facts? You'll know them when Judge Hayes knows them, Merritt said. Blair let out a light, overly breezy laugh. This all seems so unnecessary. We're all adults here. Merritt turned her gaze to her. Miss Say, Kensington, you are not a party to this custody proceeding. Color rushed to Blair's cheeks under her immaculate makeup. Harrison intervened. She is here to support me, and possibly as a character witness. Merritt didn't miss a beat. In that case, I highly recommend she be careful. There was that word again. Only this time, the barrel was pointed in the other direction. The courtroom doors opened. The clerk called our case. Sterling v. Blank. Mercer, to determine primary physical custody and temporary visitation. My maiden name sounded strange separated from his, like something cleanly sliced with a scalpel. Harrison walked in first, guiding Blair through the doors. Desmond followed. Before stepping inside, Blair looked over her shoulder at me. Auden deserves a complete family. I looked down at my daughter. She had one. Your part is what broke it. Then I walked inside. The air in the courtroom was aggressively over-air-conditioned. The heavy wooden pews faced forward. The judge's bench loomed beneath the state seal. This room didn't care about my broken heart. That was exactly why I trusted it more than Harrison's apologies. The court didn't need to love me. It needed evidence. I sat at the respondent's table next to Merritt. Harrison and Desmond sat across the aisle. Blair took a seat in the gallery directly behind Harrison, crossing her legs and perfectly draping her cream dress over her knees. She wanted to be seen. I wanted them to see the truth. Judge Hayes entered. We all stood. Auden shifted, and I pressed my lips to her temple. Good morning, Judge Hayes said. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. We are here on Mr. Sterling's petition for temporary primary physical custody of the minor child, Auden Sterling, aged 3 months. Hearing Auden's full legal name in that authoritative voice made my stomach drop. In the hospital, Harrison had insisted she take his last name, even though he had missed the first 18 hours of her life. It's tradition, he'd said. I had been too weak and heavily bleeding to fight him that day. Never again. Judge Hayes peered over her glasses at both tables. I understand emotions run high in family court. I expect restraint, relevance, and honesty. Harrison looked at me when she said the word restraint. I kept my eyes on the judge. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, you may begin. Desmond stood and buttoned his suit jacket. Your Honor, my client is a highly successful, stable, and financially secure father, deeply concerned for the welfare of his infant daughter. Since the parties separated, Miss Mercer has exhibited erratic behavior, financial instability, and an outright refusal to co-parent. We will demonstrate that Mr. Sterling can provide a safer, calmer, and far more structured environment. He paused just long enough for the words to hang in the air. Safer, calmer, structured. Blair leaned forward slightly behind him, her lipstick catching the fluorescent light. My daughter slept against my chest, completely unaware that these people were trying to present motherhood as a corporate performance review, Desmond continued. This is not an attempt to punish Miss Mercer. This is an attempt to protect Auden. I saw Merritt write a single word on her legal pad. Protect. She underlined it twice. Harrison looked at me from across the aisle, his expression saying what his lawyer couldn't legally say. You should have settled. I pulled Auden tighter against me. No, Harrison. You should have remembered who keeps the receipts. Desmond Thorne presented Harrison's case like a real estate agent staging a house for sale. All the rot was hidden beneath a fresh coat of paint. He spoke first of Harrison's income, because men like him believed money magically transformed into moral virtue once it hit a certain tax bracket. He described the house in Greenwich, the fenced-in backyard, the state-of-the-art nursery, the security system, and the proximity to elite private schools as if Auden were about to start kindergarten and wasn't currently just learning how to hold her head up. He didn't mention that the nursery had sat completely empty for 3 weeks after I moved out. He didn't mention that I was the one who bought the crib, washed the organic sheets, organized the tiny clothes by size, and spent a midnight sitting on the floor assembling a mobile while Harrison drank scotch at the Carlisle bar with Blair. Desmond showed the judge glossy printed photos of Harrison's house. The sun-drenched living room, the pristine white crib, the changing table, and a bookshelf filled with classic children's books no one had ever cracked open. The photos looked flawless. I knew for a fact they were taken after I left. The stuffed elephant hanging on the crib still had the Bloomingdale's tag attached. "Mr. Sterling has prepared a secure, welcoming environment," Desmond said. Merritt wrote another note. "Staged." Then came the attack. Desmond introduced screenshots of text messages I had sent Harrison during my first month postpartum. "I can't do this alone anymore. Please answer. She has a fever and I'm scared. I haven't slept in 2 days. I need help." He read them with an inflection that made my raw terror sound like clinical insanity. My fingers dug into Auden's blanket. I remembered sending the text about the fever at 2:13 a.m. Auden's skin had been burning. She was breathing too fast, her tiny body rigid with discomfort. I had called Harrison 7 times. He never answered. Merritt would prove exactly where he was later, but not yet. Courtrooms had a rhythm. Merritt had warned me. Let them overplay their hand. People who lie for a living usually trap themselves. So I sat perfectly still. Desmond clicked a remote, and a video played on a monitor next to the judge's bench. My living room, a corner of the sectional sofa. My face, pale, puffy, and hollowed out by sheer exhaustion. Auden was screaming in my arms. I was crying silently, my hair matted. I looked broken. I looked terrified. And I was. I knew that video. Harrison had recorded it secretly. He had come home past midnight while I was trying to soothe Auden through a colic episode. I had begged him to hold her for 10 minutes so I could take a shower. Instead, he stood in the doorway, pointing his iPhone at me. "You need to see what you look like right now," he had said. In the video, my voice cracked. "Please, stop recording me." The courtroom was dead silent. Blair looked down, pretending to feel secondhand embarrassment for me. Harrison looked pained, putting on a performance of a man burdened by his wife's mental collapse. Desmond let the video run for a few more agonizing seconds before pausing it. "Your Honor, this is the environment that deeply concerns my client." I felt my face burn, but not from shame. Shame was Harrison's favorite weapon, and I had spent way too many nights scrubbing it out of my own skin. This was something sharper. This was rage with a spine. Judge Hayes looked at me, her expression unreadable, but not unkind. "Miss Mercer, are you able to continue?" I lifted my chin. "Yes, Your Honor." Auden stirred. I shifted her gently and kept my voice steady. Desmond kept talking. "We also intend to show that Miss Mercer has alienated Mr. Sterling from the child by refusing reasonable visitation." Merritt's head snapped up. "Objection. Counsel is mischaracterizing the facts. The temporary order required Mr. Sterling to confirm visits with 24 hours' notice. He repeatedly breached that requirement." Desmond smirked coldly. "We dispute that." "I have no doubt you do," Merritt shot back. Judge Hayes looked over her glasses. "Objection overruled for now, Miss Caldwell. But the court hears you." Harrison leaned over to Desmond and whispered something. Blair reached out and rested her hand on Harrison's shoulder, a tender, highly visible display of support. The diamond on her finger caught the light again. It wasn't an engagement ring, not officially. Harrison was too cautious for that while the divorce was pending. But Blair wore it for a reason. She wanted me to look at it. And I did. I remembered the $12,000 wire transfer to a Fifth Avenue jeweler 2 days before Harrison told me we couldn't afford a night nurse. Desmond called Harrison to the stand first. He took the witness chair with the controlled, weary sadness of a man who had rehearsed the role of the misunderstood provider in the mirror. Mr. Sterling, Desmond said. Could you describe your concerns regarding Miss Mercer's capacity to care for Auden? Harrison exhaled slowly. I want to start by saying Sutton is not a bad person. That was how Harrison always prefaced public cruelty. A compliment at the front door, a knife in the hallway. She's just been under a lot of pressure. After Auden was born, she became incredibly anxious, paranoid even. She isolated herself. She rejected my help. I almost opened my mouth. Rejected help? I had begged on my hands and knees for it. Merritt's pen tapped once against her legal pad. A reminder. Wait, Harrison continued. I tried to be patient, but she made it impossible. She accused me of things. She wouldn't let me see my daughter unless I followed completely irrational, militaristic rules. Desmond nodded sympathetically. What kind of rules? She wanted everything in writing. She demanded rigid schedules. She refused to let me bring anyone around Auden. Anyone! Harrison hesitated perfectly. Even Blair. Desmond looked toward Blair with carefully calculated empathy. Why did she object to Miss Kensington being present? Harrison's face softened as he looked at the judge. There are going to be new people in Auden's life. I don't think it's healthy for Sutton to try and control that just out of jealousy. Jealousy. It was such a small, cheap word. It could reduce a woman's entire mountain of evidence down to a single, irrational emotion if the right people believed it. Desmond asked, Did Miss Mercer ever make statements indicating she couldn't cope? Harrison nodded grimly. She said she was drowning. She said she was falling apart. She said she hated her life. My throat closed. I had said those exact words after 3 consecutive sleepless nights, when Harrison walked in at dawn and complained that the apartment smelled like spoiled breast milk. I didn't hate Auden. I hated being abandoned next to her. Desmond lowered his voice. Did that scare you? Yes, Harrison said. For Auden. Blair dabbed the corner of her eye with a manicured finger. I stared at her until she looked away. Then, Merritt stood up. Mr. Sterling, she said, walking slowly toward the podium. You testified that Miss Mercer isolated herself. That's correct. And that she rejected your help. Yes, and that you were so deeply concerned for the child's safety that you filed for primary custody. Yes. Merritt looked down at her file. Where were you on March 18th, at 2:13 a.m., when Miss Mercer texted you begging for help because your 3-week-old daughter was burning up with a fever? Harrison blinked. Desmond shifted in his chair. Objection. Relevance. It goes directly to Mr. Sterling's claim that my client rejected his help, Your Honor, Merritt countered. Judge Hayes nodded. Overruled. You may answer. Harrison cleared his throat. I don't recall exactly. Merritt clicked her pen. Perhaps a hotel receipt will refresh your memory. Blair's head snapped up. Harrison's expression froze. Merritt held up a piece of paper but didn't approach him yet. She let the silence do the heavy lifting. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice echoing in the large room. Were you at the Carlisle Hotel with Miss Kensington while your infant daughter had a fever and her mother was calling you in a panic? Desmond stood up. Your Honor, Judge Hayes glared at Harrison. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. Harrison's jaw ticked. I had a work event. It ran late. Until 2:13 inches the morning? Merritt asked, feigning innocent curiosity. And Miss Kensington was part of this work event? Blair's hand dropped from the back of Harrison's chair. Yes, Harrison said stiffly. Merritt pointed to the monitor where they had just played the video of me crying. Your Honor, returning to the video introduced by opposing counsel, we believe context is necessary. The judge's gaze hardened. It had better be. Merritt turned a page. Mr. Sterling, when you filmed Miss Mercer sobbing while holding your colicky infant, had you just returned home after being unreachable for nearly 6 hours? Harrison didn't answer immediately. The entire courtroom felt the delay. I don't remember, he finally said. Merritt smiled, devoid of any warmth. That seems to happen to you quite a lot. Desmond objected. The objection was sustained, but the first massive, visible crack had just appeared in the foundation of Harrison's staged Greenwich house. When the judge called a brief recess 20 minutes later, Harrison stood up too fast. Blair whispered something to him, and he shook his head sharply. I stayed seated because Auden was starting to wake up, her little face scrunched together, and she opened her mouth to protest. I reached into the canvas bag for her bottle. Blair walked over while Merritt was talking to the court clerk. "You're just making it worse for yourself," she hissed. I didn't look up. "You should sit down, Blair. Do you honestly think a couple of hotel receipts are going to prove you're stable? He has the money, Sutton. He has the estate. He has the future." I tested the temperature of the formula on my wrist, and he has a mistress who thinks family court is an audition. Her practiced smile vanished for the first time that morning. I saw the woman underneath the cashmere dress hard, ambitious, and furious. "You lost him," she said. I fed Auden, watching my daughter's tiny hand wrap around my index finger. "No," I replied evenly. "I gave him back." Blair leaned in so close. Her expensive floral perfume clogged my lungs. "When this is over, Auden is going to be in our home," she whispered. "And she's going to learn who kept it together and who fell apart." I looked up at her. "You just said our home." A shadow of uncertainty crossed her eyes. I adjusted Auden with my left arm, and with my right hand I tapped the screen of my phone, which was sitting face up on the table among my legal pads. The voice memos app was open. The red line was recording. Blair stared at it. All the color drained from her cheeks. Just then, Merritt returned, glanced at my phone, and then at Blair. "How generous of you to provide discovery on a break," Merritt said. Blair backed away, retreating to the other side of the aisle. Harrison watched us, confused. For once, he had no idea what had just happened. That used to terrify me. Now, it felt like oxygen. The first time Harrison missed a medical appointment, I made up an excuse for him before anyone even asked. "He's stuck in a major M&A meeting," I told the ultrasound tech. I was 26 weeks pregnant. I sat on the edge of the examination table with cold gel on my belly, clutching my phone in one hand. The room was dark. Auden's little profile glowed on the monitor, her nose, a clenched fist, the rapid, fluttering heartbeat. The tech smiled kindly. "Do you want me to print an extra copy for him?" "Yes," I answered too quickly. "Please." Harrison never texted back. Later that night, he came home with a bottle of expensive Cabernet and a new watch. I was standing in the kitchen, holding the sonogram picture like it was sacred text. He kissed my cheek, glanced at the image, and said, "Cute." Then his phone buzzed, and he stepped out onto the balcony. I watched him through the glass doors. His shoulders dropped. He laughed softly. It wasn't the exhausted sigh he gave me, nor the polished chuckle he reserved for his clients. It was warm. "Don't be dramatic," I told myself. It was the phrase I swallowed most often during my pregnancy. Don't be dramatic when he forgot our anniversary, when he stopped touching me. When I found a receipt for an omakase sushi dinner for two at a restaurant he claimed to hate. When the name Blair popped up on his locked screen at 11 p.m., saved as Blair, consulting. When his mother, Eleanor, took me to lunch at Bergdorf's and told me over Cobb salads that men need space during a pregnancy. "Don't make it all about you, Sutton," she had scolded me while I tried not to fall asleep at the table. "Harrison is under immense pressure at the firm. You should just be grateful he's providing for the family." Providing. He started using that word too. "I am providing for this family," he would snap whenever I begged for his time instead of his credit card. "What else do you want?" I didn't know how to explain to an Ivy League educated man that love wasn't a mortgage payment, that fatherhood wasn't a wire transfer, that I didn't need a $1,200 up a baby stroller if I was going to be pushing it around the city by myself. So I stopped asking emotionally. I made lists. Hospital bag. Pediatrician options. Insurance forms. Daycare wait lists. Postpartum recovery supplies. Emergency contacts. Under emergency contacts, I wrote Harrison's name first. Then I stared at the blank second line for a long time. My father's name was locked in my memory like a heavy, dead-bolted door. Alaric Mercer. I hadn't called him in almost 3 years. Our last real conversation had been at my wedding reception. We were standing on the terrace of the country club, him still in his tuxedo, looking at me with the profound sorrow of a man watching his daughter walk willingly into a hurricane she insisted on calling sunshine. "He doesn't respect your strength," Sutton, my father had warned. You don't even know him, I snapped back. I know men who only love women they can diminish. I took it as an insult to Harrison. Worse, I took it as an insult to myself. You've never liked anyone I chose. My father's lips tightened. Why do you always choose people who make you starve for crumbs? I had walked away furiously. Harrison found me crying in the bridal suite and told me exactly what I wanted to hear. He's controlling. I'm your family now. I believed him. That was how the isolation crept in, not through locked doors, but through comforting words whispered by a man who benefited from every bridge I burned. When Auden was born, the bridge back to my father felt too long to cross. My water broke during a summer thunderstorm. I woke up at 3:20 a.m. with an agonizing pain in my lower back and the terrifying certainty that my life had permanently cleaved into a before and an after. Harrison wasn't home. He'd said he had a late dinner with investors. I called him once from the bathroom floor. No answer. I called again while timing the contractions. No answer. By the fourth call, my hands were shaking so violently I dropped the phone. I ordered an Uber to Mount Sinai Hospital. The driver, a woman named Maria, kept looking at me in the rearview mirror. You in labor, honey? You want me to call somebody? I already did. I lied. At the hospital, a triage nurse named Brenda helped me into a gown. She asked where my support person was. He's on his way, I lied again. Brenda didn't push. She had a kind, tired face. L and D nurses see too much to demand explanations. Auden was born 18 hours later. Harrison arrived at hour 21. By then, I was holding my daughter skin to skin, whispering, "It's just you and me." I said it before I realized how entirely literal it would become. He walked into the recovery room with damp hair, a fresh suit, and a generic bouquet of bodega flowers he'd obviously bought in the lobby. I got here as fast as I could, he said. Brenda was checking Auden's vitals. Her expression didn't change, but her hand paused for half a second. I noticed it. Harrison kissed my forehead right in front of her. You did so great. I wanted to believe him so desperately that, for about an hour, I did. Then his phone vibrated on the tray table while he was in the bathroom. The screen lit up. Blair, did she have the baby yet? I hate sleeping alone. I stared at the glowing rectangle until it went black. When Harrison stepped out, I asked, "Who is Blair?" He looked at his phone, then at me, then at the bassinet. "Are you really auditing my phone while our newborn is sleeping next to you?" He did it seamlessly. He took the knife and placed the handle right into my hand. By the time we were discharged, I had apologized to him, not because I thought I was wrong, but because I was bleeding, stitched up, terrified, and strapped into the back seat next to an infant car seat, while Harrison drove recklessly fast, punishing me with his silence. The next few weeks blurred into a nightmare of milk, physical pain, and the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen at ungodly hours. Harrison slept in the guest room for work. He said he needed his rest. Auden didn't care about his hedge fund. She needed to eat every 2 hours. She needed to be burped, changed, rocked, and shushed. She needed a mother whose body was still fundamentally broken. And she had a father who walked past the nursery door like obligation was contagious. Sometimes I stood in the doorway holding a screaming Auden and watched him leave for the office. Crisp suit, gleaming Rolex, looking profoundly annoyed. "You need to get that under control," he said once over the crying. "She's a newborn, Harrison. Other women manage it just fine." I wondered exactly which women he was surveying. Then the money started feeling off. Not obviously gone, Harrison was too smart for amateur embezzlement. But massive wire transfers began bleeding out of our joint account under corporate-sounding memo lines. Consulting retainers, event support, logistics advances, client entertainment. I had managed corporate budgets before I quit my job to have Auden. I knew exactly how people hid expenses when they thought the person reviewing the statements was too tired to do the math. One night, at 4:08 a.m., after Harrison had ignored my frantic calls about Auden's fever, I opened my laptop while she slept in fitful bursts on my chest. The apartment was pitch black except for the glow of the screen. I downloaded 3 months of bank statements. Then 6. Then 12. I created a desktop folder named Auden. Inside it, I created a subfolder named Evidence. My hand trembled as I typed the word "not" out of guilt, but because part of me knew that naming the folder meant naming what my marriage actually was. I saved everything. Bank statements, text screenshots, photos, pediatrician logs, call logs showing ignored rings, Harrison's emails making excuses, receipts from the Carlisle bar, and the Ring doorbell footage of Blair letting herself into our building while I was at my 6-week postpartum checkup. The doorbell camera had been Harrison's idea for security. He'd forgotten I had the admin password. The night I stopped making excuses wasn't the night I found the worst piece of evidence. It was much quieter than that. Auden was 5 weeks old. I was sitting on the nursery floor, trying to fold onesies with one hand while holding her with the other. Harrison walked in at 12:34 a.m. Blair's perfume walked in a second before he did. I didn't look up. "I need you to be honest with me," he sighed, as if I had asked him to move a mountain. "Not tonight, Sutton." "Yes, tonight." He loosened his tie. "You're becoming obsessed. I know about the hotel." His gaze snapped to me, suddenly sharp. "I know about the rent payments," I said, my voice dead calm. "The jewelry, the restaurants, the texts." For a split second, he looked almost relieved. Not innocent. Relieved because the rules of the game had finally changed, and he didn't have to pretend anymore. Then he said, "Fine. You want honesty? You aren't the woman I married anymore." I looked down at Auden. "I just pushed a human being out of my body. You've become bitter," he said, weaponizing his psychology degree. "Suspicious. Needy. Blair understands me." There it was. The name was finally spoken out loud in the room. She wasn't a shadow on a bank statement anymore. She was a person. I waited for my chest to cave in. Instead, I went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Harrison misread my silence as surrender. "I think we need to discuss a separation," he said smoothly. "And custody. I'm not going to let you use Auden to punish me." I let out a single dry laugh. It sounded foreign, even to me. "You've been entirely absent for her entire life. She's 5 weeks old." "Exactly." He stepped closer. "Careful, Sutton. If this gets ugly, you will not win. You don't have money. You don't have a job. You don't have your father. You don't have a single person who can stand up in a courtroom and swear you are emotionally stable." And there was the blueprint, handed right to me. I held his gaze for a long time, then reached for my phone. "What are you doing?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Taking notes." He sneered. "For what?" "For the future." He scoffed and walked down the hall to the guest room. I sat on the nursery floor until the sun came up, with Auden sleeping on my chest, and I typed out every single word he had just said, verbatim. At 7 a.m., I opened my contacts. My father's number was still there. I didn't call it not yet, but I stopped shutting the door on the idea. Blair Kensington asked me to meet her at an artisanal cafe in the West Village with Carrara marble tables, brass light fixtures, and pastries that cost more than an hour of minimum wage. It was the kind of place where women ordered matcha lattes and men in Montclair vests pretended not to look at each other's watches. I arrived 5 minutes early because Auden had fallen asleep in the stroller, and I had learned to treat infant sleep like borrowed time. You operate when the heavens allow it. Blair was already there, of course. She sat by the window in a gold-buttoned camel coat, stirring a cappuccino she hadn't taken a sip of. When she saw me, she arranged her face into a look of measured pity. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I came because you texted that it concerned Auden." "It does." I parked the Uppa-baby next to my chair and sat down without taking off my coat. Auden was completely covered by the canopy. Only one tiny, socked foot was visible under a blanket. Blair looked at the foot and sighed heavily. "She really is beautiful." I said nothing. The old version of me would have filled the silence. The old Sutton would have tried to appear polite, reasonable, and above the jealousy. I would have hated myself for caring what Blair thought, and I would have cared anyway. But that version of me was dead. The current version of me had my iPhone in my coat pocket with the voice recorder already running. Blair lowered her voice. "I know you hate me. I don't know you well enough to hate you." That annoyed her. "Good. Look, I understand why you're angry." She pivoted smoothly. But Harrison and I didn't plan this. You didn't plan to sleep with a married man while his wife was in her third trimester? Her eyes darted to the next table. A guy typing on a MacBook didn't look up, but his fingers paused. Blair leaned in. Relationships are complicated, Sutton. Infidelity is usually a symptom. She offered a tight smile. Okay. If you want to be sharp, let's be sharp. Harrison was lonely. I stared at her. Lonely. You pushed him away. You were pregnant. You became obsessed with the baby. I almost admired the sheer audacity of her cruelty. Almost. Auden shifted in the stroller and made a soft, squeaking sound. I leaned over and adjusted her blanket. Blair watched the movement like a hawk. That's what I mean, Blair said quietly. You disappear inside motherhood. And Harrison needs a partner. Someone who actually sees him. I met her gaze. You saw him so clearly you completely missed the wedding band. Her cheeks flushed a deep, ugly red. Harrison told me your marriage was over. It wasn't over when he was in my bed. Her lips parted, then clamped shut. I let the silence hang over the marble table until it suffocated her. She took a deep breath, recalibrating. I didn't ask you here to argue. Then why am I here? Because the trial is going to be excruciating for everyone. And I think it would be better for you to accept reality right now. What reality? That Harrison can give Auden more. And there it was. The thesis statement. Not love, not care, more. More money, more square footage, more optics, more perfectly curated Hamptons family photos where Blair could wear a white linen dress and hold a baby she didn't have to labor for. I leaned back in the bistro chair. More of what? A stable home, Blair recited. A father who can provide for her. And a mother figure who isn't. Drowning. Those words were heavily rehearsed. I could practically hear Desmond Thorne's billing hours behind them. A mother figure. I repeated blankly. Blair's hand tightened around her Demitas spoon. You know what I mean. I want to hear you say it. I gestured to the stroller. She's asleep. Speak freely. It worked. Her vanity overrode her legal prudence. I mean someone who can help raise her without turning every single day into a crisis, Blair said coldly. Someone put together. Presentable. Someone who isn't sobbing on the floor in yesterday's clothes while holding a baby. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my face blank. Harrison showed you that video. Her eyes widened, then narrowed defensively. He was deeply concerned. He was documenting it because he didn't know what else to do. He could have put down his phone and taken his daughter for 10 minutes. Blair looked away. She knew. Of course she knew. Women like Blair knew exactly what men like Harrison were capable of. They just arrogantly believed the cruelty would always be aimed at someone else. She picked up her cup. Look, I'm not trying to replace you. No? But Auden is going to be spending half her time with Harrison and I will be there. It would be a lot healthier if you stopped treating me like I'm some temporary mistake. I could feel the heat of my phone in my pocket. The little red light recording every syllable. How long have you been letting yourself into Harrison's house? I asked. Her gaze hardened. Why does that matter? Curiosity. That's between me and Harrison. It was my house, too. She held my stare for a long, triumphant moment, then smirked. Do you really want to know? Yes. I was there more times than you think. My stomach twisted. But I didn't flinch. While you were at your OBGYN appointments, sometimes while you were in the hospital, don't be dramatic, Sutton. There it was, the Sterling family heirloom phrase, passed from Harrison to Eleanor, and now to the mistress. Blair kept going. You and Harrison were already broken. I just gave him a place to breathe. No, I corrected her quietly. He gave you our marital funds, our time, and my place in his life while I was carrying his child. She gave a delicate, dismissive shrug. And now he wants to protect Auden from all that bitterness. All that bitterness. She meant me. She meant my refusal to roll over and die quietly. A waitress approached with a polite smile, felt the sub-zero tension at the table, and immediately backed away. Blair dropped her voice to a fatalistic whisper. Let me be blunt. Harrison is going to win. Maybe not full custody, but enough to make you miserable. He has the house. He has the income. He has his mother's society connections. And he has people who will testify that you are medically unstable. She paused. A significant Heavy pause. What people? I asked. Blair realized she had stepped over a line. I'm not here to talk legal strategy. You brought up the trial. I'm just giving you reality. I leaned forward slightly. You and Harrison have discussed how to make me look unstable. Her face locked down. Careful, she warned. The word sounded flimsy coming from her mouth. She stood up and pulled her camel coat tight. I was hoping we could handle this like adults. You were hoping I'd be intimidated. She grabbed her designer bag. You should be. She leaned down toward the stroller, not close enough to touch Auden, but close enough to make me stand up. I moved so fast my chair scraped violently against the marble floor. Blair smirked. Say, this is exactly what I mean. Unhinged. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tapped the screen to stop the recording. Her eyes dropped to the device for the first time since she sat down. Genuine panic flared in her pupils. You were recording me. We're in a public place, Blair. A one-party consent state, I said smoothly. And you literally asked to speak about my daughter. You can't use that in court. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. But my lawyer is going to have a great time listening to Harrison's Mistress discuss playing mother figure, legal strategies, and coordinating testimony to fake my mental instability. Her manicured hand gripped the strap of her bag so hard her knuckles turned white. I didn't say strategy. You said enough. She looked back at the stroller. This time there was absolutely no faux sweetness in her eyes. Do you think this makes you strong? She hissed. You're still the broke woman he dumped. No, I said, zipping up my coat. I'm the mother he chronically underestimated. I walked out before she could say another word. Outside, the Manhattan afternoon air was frigid and blindingly bright. Auden woke up as I pushed the stroller down Bleecker Street. Her soft, sleepy cries rose into the winter sky. I stopped in front of a pharmacy window and unbuckled her, lifting her out of the seat. I know, I whispered into her warm neck. I know. My phone vibrated. It was from an unknown number. The text contained a single photo. Harrison and Blair walking into the lobby of the Carlisle Hotel. The timestamp burned in the corner was March 18th. Saru, 10:20 a.m. The exact night, Auden had a 102-degree fever. Beneath the photo was a single line of text. Thought you might need this. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my daughter, staring at the screen while city traffic blurred past me. For months, Harrison had counted on keeping me in the dark. Now, even strangers were handing me flashlights. My father lived behind wrought iron gates in Westchester County that I used to absolutely despise. When I was a teenager, those gates felt like a prison. When I married Harrison, they felt like an indictment of my privilege. Alaric Mercer's estate sat at the end of a long, sweeping driveway flanked by ancient maples and aggressively manicured hedges. It wasn't flashy. My father had never been a man who cared about showing off. The house was built of gray stone and old New York money. It was the kind of house people call tasteful when what they really mean is impenetrable. I parked my rented Honda by the front steps and turned off the engine. Auden was fast asleep in her car seat in the back. For 5 solid minutes, I couldn't move my hands from the steering wheel. I had faced down Blair. I had faced down Harrison. I was preparing to face down a judge who held my child's fate in her hands. But the thought of ringing my own father's doorbell made my palms sweat. Maybe because I had once thrown his love back in his face and called it a control tactic. Maybe because I was terrified he would look at me and see the exact failure he had predicted. Or maybe because a small, dark part of my brain still heard Harrison's voice. Your dad doesn't want you back, Sutton. He just wants to say, I told you so. I looked at Auden in the rearview mirror. Her mouth was slightly open, a tiny crease appearing and disappearing between her eyebrows. I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out. The heavy mahogany door opened before I even reached the top step. My father stood in the threshold wearing a dark gray cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked older than I remembered, yet simultaneously unchanged. The lines around his sharp eyes were carved deeper. The hair at his temples was pure silver. His famously stoic face broke the second he saw the infant carrier in my hand. Sutton, he breathed. I stopped on the bottom step. Hi, Dad. For a terrible second, neither of us moved. Then, Auden let out a loud, unhappy grunt, and the spell snapped. My father stepped back, opening the door wider. Come inside. It's freezing. The grand foyer smelled of cedar polish and the lemon chamomile tea my late mother used to drink. I hadn't expected the scent to physically knock the wind out of me. A knot formed in my throat so fast I choked on it. My father noticed, but he had the grace not to say anything. He led me into the library, where a fire was popping behind a brass screen. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls. My mother's old Steinway piano sat by the window, draped in a cream-colored dust cover. I used to play that piano after school while my father read financial reports in his leather wingback chair. He always pretended he wasn't listening, but every time I finished a piece he would murmur, "Again, but slower. Don't rush the ending." God, I wished I had remembered that earlier in my life. Don't rush the ending. I set Auden's carrier on the Persian rug and unbuckled the straps. She woke up stretching, letting out a little squeak. My father froze. "Do you want to hold her?" I asked. His face changed. Not dramatically. Alaric Mercer didn't do anything dramatically, but something foundational inside him seemed to crack open. "If you'll let me," the sheer caution in those 4 words almost broke me. I lifted Auden and placed her into his arms. For half a second, he held her awkwardly. A corporate titan holding a fragile bomb. Then, some ancient, buried instinct kicked in, and he tucked her perfectly into the crook of his elbow. Auden stared up at him, thoroughly unimpressed. "This is Auden," I whispered. "Auden," he repeated, his voice thick. "Your mother loved that name." "I know." He looked up at me. There were 100 unsaid conversations in that look. The wedding, the silent holidays, the missed birthdays, the phone calls we both stubbornly refused to make, and the immense, stupid pride that had kept us apart long after the actual anger had burned out. "I should have come sooner," he said gruffly. I shook my head. "I should have called." "Yes," he replied instantly. "You should have." It was so remarkably him that I let out a choked, watery laugh. He never softened the truth. He never coddled, but he didn't twist the knife either. He sat down in the wingback chair with Auden and nodded toward the leather sofa. "Tell me exactly what is happening." And I did. Not all at once. I gave him the sterile facts first, because facts were easier to swallow. The pregnancy, the missed ultrasounds, Blair, the hospital, the hotel receipts, the hidden money, the separation, and finally, the custody petition. My father listened in absolute silence. His large hand rested protectively over Auden's blanket. Every now and then, a muscle in his jaw would leap. When I told him Harrison had brought Blair to the courthouse and planned to argue that I had zero support system, my father finally looked up. "He put that in a legal filing?" "Yes. He truly believes it." My father's face went sub-zero. I had only seen that specific expression a few times in my life. Once, when a contractor tried to scam my mother. Once, when a board member lied to his face. And once, when I was 17, and a man twice my age put his hand too low on my waist at a charity gala. It wasn't loud, performative anger like Harrison's. Harrison's anger took up all the oxygen in a room and demanded you apologize for it. My father's anger sucked the sound out of the room entirely. "I am calling Alexander," my father said, referring to his ruthless corporate fixer. "He will bury this kid in injunctions before the sun sets." "No," I said sharply. My father glared at me. "He is trying to take your child." "I know." "He paraded his mistress through family court." "I know." "He thinks you have no one." "I know, Dad." The old, destructive rhythm threatened to flare up. He pushes. I resist. Love mutates into control because neither of us knows how to just let it exist. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "I need you to stand behind me," I said firmly. "Not in front of me." He leaned back slowly. The fire crackled. "Explain." "Harrison has spent 2 years convincing me I have no one because it served his narrative. I believed him because I was too proud to admit to you how badly I was drowning. I will not replace one man's control with another's." My father's eyes darted down to Auden, then back to me. "What do you need?" The question almost ruined me. Not, "What did you do?" Not, "Why didn't you listen?" Not, "I told you so. What do you need?" "I need you to testify that I have family support," I said. "That Auden and I have a safe, permanent place to land if we need it. I need the trust fund documents Mom left me." If I still have access to it, I need to prove I am not financially trapped. And I need you to walk into that courtroom without anyone knowing you're coming. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because Harrison's entire legal strategy relies on the premise that I am broke and completely isolated. And you want him to walk into his own trap on the record. Yes. He studied me for a long time, assessing the woman sitting on his couch, realizing she wasn't the stubborn girl who had stormed out of his country club. He nodded slowly. You aren't asking me to rescue you. No, I'm asking you to stand exactly where he can finally see you. Where Auden will one day know you were. He swallowed hard. I'll be there. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 years. Then he said, one more thing. He stood up carefully, cradling Auden, and walked over to his massive mahogany desk. He opened a heavy drawer and pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder. Your mother set this up before she died. You were 21. She knew you hated talking about money, so she made me promise not to force it on you until you were ready. Perhaps I respected her wishes too literally. He handed me the folder. Inside were the irrevocable trust documents. My name, my mother's signature, an 8-figure principal I had never touched. I stared at the numbers, the zeros blurring together. I didn't know it was this much. After you got engaged, I told you we needed to discuss your financial independence. You told me Harrison didn't care about money. I squeezed my eyes shut. I remembered. Harrison had acted deeply offended when my father suggested a prenup. He'd said it made him feel like an employee, not a partner. I had repeated Harrison's talking points to my father like they were gospel. My father hadn't argued back. Now, I understood why his silence that day had felt so heavy. It was the silence of a man watching a steel trap snap shut around his child's ankle. I don't want to use this to crush him, I whispered, staring at the pages. You don't have to, my father replied. You just have to prove he can't use money to crush you. The distinction was everything. I traced my mother's signature. For months, Harrison had called himself the provider while quietly funneling our joint money to fund Blair's lifestyle. He had built a custody case on the illusion of my poverty, and my mother, gone for 9 years, had left a door unlocked for me. What if the judge thinks this is just a sudden bailout from a rich dad to look good for court? I asked. Then your lawyer will show the judge the date, my father said calmly. It was established long before Harrison filed any petition. She will say you chose to keep it private. I did. I genuinely didn't know. Then that is the absolute truth. The simplicity of his logic almost made me laugh. Harrison lied so pathologically that the truth had started to feel unsophisticated to me. My father handed Auden back to me. She grumbled in her sleep, rooting into my sweater. I'm sorry, I said softly. My father looked at the covered piano. Me too. For letting my pride look like patience. He cleared his throat. When you left with him, I told myself you'd made your choice. I thought giving you space was a sign of respect. Maybe part of it was, maybe the other part was just fear that you'd reject me again if I reached out. My chest ached physically. I was so ashamed. I know. I thought if I called, you'd just tell me you were right about him. He offered a sad half-smile. I was right. But being right is completely useless when your child is bleeding. For the first time in a decade, I sat in my father's library and allowed myself to just be a daughter. Not instead of being a mother, but because being a mother was the exact thing that had finally driven me back home. The sun had set behind the maples by the time I packed up the car. My father walked me to the driveway. I will coordinate with Merritt, he said. Thank you. He looked at Auden, then cupped my cheek with his rough hand. Sutton, do not make yourself small in that room just to make him comfortable. I thought of Harrison's perfectly tailored suit, Blair's smug lipstick, the humiliating video playing on loop, and the legal strategy designed to weaponize my postpartum depression. I won't, I promised. As I drove back toward the city, my phone buzzed on the dashboard mount. A text from Harrison. I hope you are seriously considering the settlement. Trial is going to be humiliating for you. I kept my eyes on the highway ahead. For once, I hoped he was right about the humiliation. I just knew it wasn't going to be mine. Be realistic. That was Harrison's favorite phrase during our marriage. He deployed it whenever reality favored his bank account or his convenience. Be realistic, Sutton. I can't come to every ultrasound. Be realistic. My job funds this lifestyle. Be realistic, Blair is just a consultant. Be realistic. You have zero leverage against me. After leaving Westchester, I drove straight to Merritt's office in Midtown, carrying a sleeping Auden and my mother's trust documents. Merritt read the first page, flipped to the second, and slowly took off her reading glasses. "Well," she said, tapping her manicured nail against the desk, "this incinerates his financial superiority argument. I don't want it to look like my dad is buying the verdict. He isn't. Stability matters in family court. Primary caretaking matters. Truth matters. Money alone doesn't buy a judge, but Harrison made it the cornerstone of his attack. So, we nuke the cornerstone." Merritt flipped the document around. "This proves you had access to massive independent resources. It doesn't matter that you didn't touch them. It proves you aren't a gold digger, you aren't destitute, and you aren't desperate. You didn't fabricate stability yesterday. You just didn't weaponize it until he threatened to take your kid." I looked over at Auden sleeping in her car seat on Merritt's floor. I should have known about the fund. "You were busy surviving," Merritt said factually. "It wasn't meant as comfort. It was an objective legal statement." She opened another thick binder. "Now, let's talk about Harrison's idea of providing for the family." She spread printed bank statements across the conference table. Some I recognized from my 4 a.m. downloads. Others were newly acquired through mandatory financial discovery. Rows of numbers, shell company names, and wire transfers. Merritt had highlighted 3 columns in neon yellow. Your joint marital accounts were heavily subsidizing Blair Kensington's personal life. Rent assistance disguised as consulting invoices. Jewelry. Luxury travel. Fine dining. And a retainer for a personal stylist. "A stylist?" I repeated. "Apparently, he hired one for her a week before your first hearing." I leaned back in the ergonomic chair. Blair had dressed for family court the way an actress dresses for a callback, because that was exactly what she was doing. "How much?" I asked. Merritt didn't blink. "From the joint account and marital business distributions we've traced so far, roughly $55,000 over 11 months. The room went dead quiet, save for Auden's soft breathing. $55,000. While I was price-matching organic formula, while I put off pelvic floor physical therapy because paying out of pocket felt irresponsible, while Harrison told me a night nurse was a luxury for women who wanted to outsource motherhood, my fingernails dug into my palms under the table. Merritt noticed. "Focus on the math, Sutton." "I'm fine. Anger is highly effective if you keep it organized." That became our entire methodology. We organized the rage. We matched the Carlisle Hotel receipt to the exact timestamp of Auden's fever text. We matched the Fifth Avenue jewelry charge to Blair's Instagram posts. We matched Harrison's late-night client dinners to Uber receipts dropping off in the West Village. We matched his canceled weekend visits to calendar invites containing Blair's name. Every lie had a timestamp. Every gaslighting session had a receipt. Every attempt to make me look crazy now had devastating context. Then, Merritt showed me Harrison's proposed settlement offer. Desmond Thorne had emailed it over with a patronizing note about avoiding unnecessary trauma for the mother. The agreement offered me nominal child support and joint legal custody on paper. But physical custody would flip primarily to Harrison the second Auden turned 6 months old. It included a strict morality clause for me, but curiously not for him. It restricted my ability to move outside a 5-mile radius of Manhattan. It allowed Harrison to designate trusted third parties for childcare during his time, which legally meant Blair. And it included a strict non-disclosure agreement. I read the NDA clause twice. "He wants to buy my silence," I said. "Not peace." Merritt nodded. "If you sign this, Blair gets your daughter half the week before Auden can even sit up unassisted. And look at the holiday schedule." I pointed to page 12. He allocated my first Mother's Day to his weekend. It wasn't a clerical error. It was a message. I closed the binder. "We're rejecting this." "I know," Merritt said. "But you needed to say it out loud." My phone rang. The screen flashed Harrison. Merritt looked at it. "You don't have to answer. I want to." She tapped her own phone, activated her recording app, and gave me a curt nod. New York is a one-party consent state, but since we were in a law office with active litigation, Merritt needed to witness it. I hit accept and put it on speaker. "Did you freeze the joint checking account?" Harrison's voice was clipped, furious. Yes, I said. You had no right to do that. It's a marital asset currently under review in an active divorce proceeding. You sound like a paralegal, he spat. There was a tense pause. I am trying to be fair to you, Sutton. You mean the settlement that gives your mistress unfettered access to my infant and legally gags me? Blair is part of my family now. She's your affair partner, Harrison. She's not going away, but neither am I. His breathing shifted. Once upon a time, that specific intake of breath would have made me apologize preemptively. You're making yourself look hostile, he warned. I am establishing boundaries. You have no idea what you're risking. I absolutely do. No, you don't. Judges care about stability, Sutton. I have the Greenwich House. I have the income. I have my family's backing. You have a history of postpartum meltdowns and resentment. Merritt looked up, her eyes gleaming like a shark. I kept my voice deadpan. Do you want to discuss Auden's upcoming medical schedule? I asked. Don't change the subject. It's the only subject we are legally required to discuss. Fine, he snapped. Let's talk about Auden. Do you really think it's good for her to watch her mother emotionally disintegrate? My stomach turned over, but I heard Merritt's pen scratching furiously. Auden is 3 months old, I said evenly. What is good for her is being fed, safe, and held by a stable adult. Exactly. Which is why I am filing this. Then answer one question for me, Harrison. What brand of formula is she currently eating? The silence on the line was so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Don't play games with me, Sutton. What size diapers is she wearing? What is the name of her pediatrician? I know who her doctor is. Then say his name. He cursed under his breath. Merritt wrote 3 words in block letters. Father does not know. Harrison retreated to his favorite bunker. Anger. You're trying to trap me. No. I'm asking you basic survival questions about the infant you are suing to take primary custody of. I am her father. Then start acting like one. The words left my mouth before I could filter them. I didn't regret them. Harrison went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was laced with pure venom. You are going to deeply regret choosing this path. No, I said. I regret the other one. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but only slightly. Merritt leaned back in her chair. Well, that was highly productive. He sounded like a monster. He sounded like himself. We spent the next hour drafting the formal response. No more direct phone calls. All communication regarding the child was to be routed through a court-approved parenting app. Medical emergencies via email only. No third-party contact with the minor child without mutual written consent. When I finally left Merritt's office, a cold, sleeting rain had started to fall. I stood under the awning on Park Avenue, struggling to balance Auden's car seat, the diaper bag, and an umbrella. Across the street, a black Range Rover was idling in the bus lane. At first, I didn't notice it. Then the passenger window rolled down. Blair was sitting in the passenger seat. Harrison was behind the wheel. She stared at me through the sleet, not smiling this time. Harrison's face was obscured by the shadows of the cab, but I could feel his rage vibrating across 4 lanes of traffic. My phone buzzed. A text from Desmond Thorne to Merritt, CCing me. Miss. Mercer's refusal to cooperate in mediation. I looked at the text, then up at the Range Rover. I forwarded the email to Merritt with a single note. Add it to the exhibit list. The SUV sped away, its tires splashing dark water onto the curb. Auden slept through the thunder. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like I was being hunted. I felt like I was documenting my prey. Mount Sinai Hospital looked different when I walked in, without an enormous belly and sheer panic flooding my veins. It looked brighter, less imposing. I walked the halls of the maternity ward with Auden strapped to my chest in a carrier, feeling my body viscerally recall what my brain had tried to archive as sterile facts. The smell of antiseptic, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant, muffled wail of a newborn behind a closed door, the rhythmic beeping of monitors. This was where I became a mother. This was where Harrison became a ghost. Merritt had arranged a meeting with Brenda, the triage-turned-recovery nurse who had been with me during my labor. I found her at the nurse's station, squinting at a chart. She looked up, and recognition flashed across her tired features before I even spoke. "Sutton," she said warmly. "And this must be Auden." Auden stared at her with her usual judgmental infant gaze. Brenda chuckled. "She has your eyes. Thank you for agreeing to meet with my lawyer." Brenda's expression sobered. "I wondered if I'd ever hear from you. I'm not entirely surprised." She led us into a small consultation room at the end of the hall. It had 2 plastic chairs, a round table, and a box of tissues that immediately signaled bad news. Brenda sat across from me. "I've been working L&D for 20 years, Brenda said flatly. "You learn exactly what real support looks like, and you learn what the absence of it looks like, even when a guy is wearing a Tom Ford suit." A lump formed in my throat. Merritt said you might be willing to submit an affidavit. Brenda opened a manila folder she'd brought with her. Inside were copies of my charts. Time of admission: 04:10. Support person absent. Patient attempted to contact husband multiple times. Husband arrived 3 hours post-delivery. Patient physically exhausted but highly attentive to newborn. 0 concerns noted regarding maternal bonding or capacity to follow medical directives. I read the words twice. 0 concerns noted. 5 boring clinical words. After months of Harrison turning my exhaustion into a weapon, those words felt like a life raft. Brenda watched my face. He walked in with bodega flowers and a script. He told the front desk he was in a meeting. "He told you he was stuck in traffic." I looked up. "He told you there was traffic?" It was almost midnight. I closed my eyes. The lies didn't shock me anymore. There were just so many of them, it was exhausting to process. Brenda leaned forward. "He also asked me if postpartum anxiety could affect custody." My eyes snapped open. "The morning after you delivered," Brenda continued grimly, "you were asleep. The baby was in the bassinet." He walked up to the station and casually asked how medical records categorize postpartum emotional episodes and who gets access to them. Ice coated my spine. Auden was less than 24 hours old, and Harrison was already thinking in legal strategy. Not about diapers, not about my torn body, not about how to swaddle his kid. Custody leverage. Brenda's mouth formed a hard line. I told him the emotional adjustment after childbirth is completely normal and does not indicate unfitness. He looked genuinely disappointed. I exhaled a shaky breath. "Would you say that in a formal deposition?" "I'll say it to the judge's face, if I have to." I looked down at Auden, who was currently studying a ceiling tile like it held the secrets to the universe. "Thank you." Brenda reached across the table and tapped my hand. "I don't know your whole story, Sutton, but I do know that a woman crying after pushing an 8-pound human out of her body doesn't mean she's crazy. Sometimes it just means every single person in her life failed her." I had to look away. Some truths hit the bone. After the hospital, I went to see Mrs. Gallagher. She lived in the co-op directly beneath the apartment Harrison and I used to share. Her place was a jungle of overgrown monsteras, framed photos of grandkids, and smelled aggressively of cinnamon and old books. She was 72, a widow, sharp as broken glass, and had once told Harrison to his face that he parked his Porsche like a man raised without the concept of consequences. I had always loved her. She opened her door before I could knock twice. "Look at you," she said, zeroing in on Auden. "Here comes the little queen." Auden sneezed. Mrs. Gallagher clutched her pearls. "Perfection. Come in." I explained the situation over chamomile tea. I didn't have to explain much. Mrs. Gallagher had seen far more than I realized. "I knew something was rotten the second that blonde started hovering around," she said, pouring tea. "Blair is brunette," I said softly. She was blonde that month. Despite the dread sitting in my stomach, I laughed. "Mrs. Gallagher pointed a silver spoon at me. "Don't laugh. I can spot Mistress energy from 3 zip codes away." She opened a bulky Dell laptop on her dining table. "I have my own Ring camera," she said proudly. "My son installed it because he thinks I'm fragile. I use it to spy on package thieves and idiots." She clicked open a folder. Dates and timestamps filled the screen. "Here we go," she muttered. Video 1. Blair stepping out of the elevator at 10:52 p.m. wearing a black trench coat. Harrison opening our apartment door from the inside before she even knocked. Video 2. Blair leaving at 6. 14 a.m., wearing oversized sunglasses, despite the hallway having 0 windows. Video 3. Harrison kissing Blair passionately by the elevator bank while a framed maternity photo of me still hung on the wall right next to our door. My hands went completely numb. Mrs. Gallagher saw my face and half-closed the laptop lid. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "Don't be," I said, forcing my lungs to work. "I need this. Did you copy them to the flash drive?" She gave me a withering look. "I already uploaded them to a Dropbox folder for your lawyer. Men like him think old women are just furniture. We see everything." I covered my mouth with my hand not to cry, but to trap the feral sound that wanted to escape my throat. Mrs. Gallagher reached across the lace tablecloth and squeezed my wrist. "You were always so polite," she said softly. "Too thin after the baby. Always dragging the laundry, always hauling the stroller. And he just floated in and out of the building like a guest in his own life." That exact sentence became her sworn affidavit. By sunset, Merritt had Brenda's medical testimony, Mrs. Gallagher's video files, and the sworn statement of Chloe, the postpartum doula I had hired out of pocket for a grand total of 6 hours before Harrison canceled her. I called Chloe from my kitchen while Auden did tummy time on a foam mat. Chloe remembered Harrison vividly. "He asked me where the formula was," Chloe recalled over the phone. "I told him it was in the labeled OXO container directly next to the baby Brezza. He literally opened the pantry and stared at a wall. I asked if he would tell your lawyer the same thing." "Yes. He also didn't support Auden's neck properly," Chloe added. "When I gently corrected his hold, he snapped at me. He told me he paid my invoice, not to tell him what to do." "Oh. And he asked me if you were prone to hysterics." "Hysterics?" "He wasn't asking out of concern, Sutton. He was asking like he was gathering material." "Gathering material?" That was it exactly. While I was gathering evidence of his absence, he had been selectively gathering fragments of my pain. The difference was intent. Mine was to protect Auden. His was to protect his ego. That night, after Auden went down to sleep, I sat at my small kitchen table and finalized the witness list. Brenda, RN. Medical timeline. Lack of spousal support. Mrs. Gallagher. Camera footage, pattern of infidelity, abandonment. Chloe, doula. Father's inability to perform basic childcare, doctor. Heiress, pediatrician. Mother's exclusive attendance at all medical visits. Financial records. Marital funds diverted to Mistress. Audio recording. Blair Kensington's intent to replace mother. Audio recording. Eleanor Sterling. Pending. I stared at the last line. Eleanor, Harrison's mother, had called me twice that afternoon. I ignored both. At 9:18 p.m., she left a voicemail. "Sutton, this has gone far enough. We need to speak before you embarrass yourself in court. Auden is a Sterling. Do not force us to crush you." I saved the voicemail and texted Eleanor back. "We can meet tomorrow at noon. Public place only." Her reply was instantaneous. "Fine. Dress appropriately." I read the text and actually smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was one of exhausted, absolute awe. These people genuinely believed humiliation was their birthright weapon. They had no idea I had already filed it away as Exhibit G. Eleanor Sterling chose the restaurant. Of course she did. It was a private back room at Daniel on the Upper East Side, where the chairs were upholstered in pale blue velvet and the menus didn't list prices. Harrison took his clients there when he wanted to prove he was rich, before proving he was competent. I arrived exactly at noon wearing black trousers, a gray cashmere turtleneck, and no jewelry except my mother's thin gold wedding band on a chain tucked under my collar. Auden was staying for 2 hours with Martha, my father's longtime housekeeper. It was the first time I had left her with anyone in my family, and I had cried for 3 solid minutes in my car before walking into the restaurant. Not because I didn't trust Martha, but because freedom, when you're used to feeling trapped, initially feels exactly like danger. Eleanor sat at the head of the table like she was presiding over a board meeting. She wore Mikimoto pearls, a cream silk blouse, and the permanent expression of a woman who believes good manners are something other people owe her personally. "Sutton," she said flatly. "You're late." I checked my phone. It's 12 on the dot. Exactly. I sat across from her. A waiter in a crisp vest poured sparkling water. Eleanor waited until the heavy oak door clicked shut before speaking. I won't waste your time, Sutton. That would be a first. Her eyes narrowed into slits. That attitude is precisely why Harrison left. I took my phone out of my purse and placed it face down on the white tablecloth. The voice memo was running. Eleanor noticed the movement. Are you recording me? Yes. At least I have the decency to do it to your face. I'm learning from your son. The red flush of aristocratic rage crept up her neck, but she contained it. Fine. Record. Maybe it will force you to listen to reason. She opened a leather portfolio. Our attorneys have reviewed your situation. You have no case. If I have no case, why did Harrison file for primary custody? Because Auden is a sterling. She is my granddaughter. And frankly, Sutton, you never understood what that means. And what does it mean? It means she belongs to a legacy. There it was. Not love. Legacy. I looked around the room, the crystal glasses, the heavy drapes, the closed door. Is that why Harrison suddenly wants her? For the family crest? Eleanor's lips pinched together. Harrison has always wanted what is best for his child. He missed her birth because he was sleeping with Blair. Eleanor flinched, though only slightly. I am not here to discuss that woman. That woman was in family court yesterday, holding his hand. That was new information. Eleanor looked genuinely revolted, as if she was deeply annoyed Harrison was messing up the optics. Harrison is emotional right now. He feels attacked by you. I almost applauded. The sheer Olympic-level gymnastics required to twist reality that far was astounding. He filed a lawsuit to rip a 3-month-old infant from her mother after abandoning us during my pregnancy. He did it because he thinks I'm unstable. You are unstable, Sutton. Look at you. Based on what? A video he secretly recorded? My crying when he left me alone with a screaming newborn? Her face turned to granite. Motherhood is difficult. That doesn't make my son a villain. No, but defrauding our marital accounts to pay his mistress's rent does. She sucked in a sharp breath. You are being vulgar. I am being legally precise. Eleanor picked up her water glass and set it down without drinking. Listen to me very carefully, she said, her voice dropping into a lethal, patrician purr. You are angry right now. I understand that. But anger doesn't pay retainer fees. Anger doesn't put a roof over your head. Anger will not get Auden into Spence or Dalton. He used the sterling legacy money to buy Blair Cartier bracelets. Eleanor's facade finally cracked. I don't know the exact amounts, but do not make accusations you cannot substantiate. I can substantiate every penny. Silence suffocated the room. Eleanor stared at the closed door as if hoping a waiter would interrupt. No one came. What do you want? She finally asked. Primary physical custody. Child support calculated accurately to his actual income, not his hidden income. No contact between Blair Kensington and my daughter, and all communication routed through attorneys. Eleanor let out a sharp, genuine laugh. You have become incredibly ambitious. I woke up. Do you honestly think because some bulldog lawyer is whispering in your ear, you can dictate terms to this family? This family isn't a judge, Eleanor. The judge will see reason. She meant money. She leaned forward. You keep throwing around these demands, but you lack the basic foundation to support them. Let's not pretend. Your father cut you off years ago. You live in a temporary rental. Harrison has the estate, the income, our backing, and a partner willing to step in and mother that child. A mistress, I corrected. A partner, Eleanor repeated coldly, who understands the world Auden was born into. I let the silence stretch. Eleanor interpreted it as my breaking point. She softened her voice, which was infinitely more nauseating than her rage. You can still be her mother on alternating weekends, Sutton. Nobody is erasing you. But if Auden lives primarily in Greenwich, she will have the best schools, the right circles, the best opportunities. She's only 3 months old. Time flies. In Harrison's settlement offer, I said slowly, he demanded my first Mother's Day. Eleanor looked away. You knew, I whispered. You approved that draft. You need to learn that motherhood is not ownership, Sutton. Sometimes loving a child means knowing when to step aside. There it was, the purest distillation of their evil. They wanted me to stay alive just long enough to be grateful for the crumbs, and quiet enough so they could completely replace me. I stood up. "We are done." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "Sit down. Do not walk away while I am speaking to you." "I already am." I picked up my phone and stopped the recording right in front of her. She stared at the screen, a flicker of true dread crossing her face. "Do you think a recording of a private lunch scares me? I think it proves you view my daughter as property." She stood up, gripping the edge of the table. "If you drag the Sterling name through a public trial, you will be destroyed." "Eleanor," I said softly, "I gave birth without you. I recovered without you. I begged your son for help, and he walked away. I am completely incapable of being destroyed by you anymore." For the very first time, she looked uncertain. Not remorseful, just unsure of her footing. I walked out of the private room before she could arrange her face back into superiority. In the lobby, my phone buzzed. It was Merritt. Did she say anything useful? I sent the audio file with a single sentence. She said Auden belongs to the Sterling legacy, and I should step aside. Merritt replied instantly, "Excellent. Repugnant, but excellent." Outside, the sky was white with winter light. I stood under the maroon awning of Daniel and took a deep breath. Then my phone vibrated again. It was my father. "I will be in court tomorrow." Then a second text arrived. "Behind you, not in front of you, just like you asked." I stared at the words until they blurred. Behind you. For years, I had believed that accepting help meant surrendering my autonomy. Now I understood the difference. Control stands in front of you and blocks the sun. Support stands behind you and guards your back. When I returned to Westchester, Auden was asleep on my father's chest. He was sitting in the wingback chair, pretending to read the Wall Street Journal. I raised an eyebrow. He slowly folded the paper. "She cried for exactly 8 minutes," he reported. And then she stared at me with intense, highly critical judgment. "Sounds like my girl." Martha laughed and came over to carefully transfer Auden into my arms. The second I felt the solid, warm weight of my daughter against my chest, the lingering poison of Eleanor Sterling evaporated. Tomorrow, Harrison was going to stand up in a court of law and confidently declare that I was entirely alone. He was going to bet his life on it. And tomorrow, for the first time in his perfectly curated life, he was going to watch his certainty burn to the ground. The mediation room in the courthouse had no windows. That was intentional. It was a beige box with a fake wood conference table, 6 chairs, a pitcher of tepid water, and a wall clock that ticked aggressively loud. Rooms like this were explicitly designed to exhaust people until they signed away their rights just to see the sky again. Harrison arrived with Desmond Thorne. Blair arrived with Harrison. That was the first provocation. Merritt stared at Blair, then turned a glacial look on Desmond. "Miss Kensington is not a party to this mediation." Desmond smirked, setting his briefcase on the table. "She is here to provide Mr. Sterling with emotional support." "Emotional support?" Merritt asked loudly. "For the man who brought his affair partner to mediate the custody of his infant?" Blair lifted her chin, clutching her Prada tote. "I care about Auden. I had promised myself I wouldn't engage her unless absolutely necessary." This was necessary. "You have never changed a single diaper in your life, Blair." She opened her mouth, but Harrison cut her off. "This is exactly why she's here, Sutton. You are hostile to everyone in my life." "No," I replied smoothly. "I am highly protective of everyone in Auden's life." The mediator, a chronically exhausted man named Mr. Peterson, cleared his throat. "Let's focus on the minor child, folks." I almost told him that was exactly what I had been doing since the day my water broke. Instead, I opened my binder. Desmond handed out his revised settlement offer. Revised meant longer, not fairer. The new agreement still proposed joint physical custody, but explicitly granted Harrison 4 overnights a week, starting when Auden turned 6 months old. It allowed romantic partners to provide primary childcare. It required both parties to refrain from disparaging each other, a gag order designed to erase Harrison's infidelity. It restricted my relocation to a 1.5-mile radius in Manhattan. And it added a brand new, terrifying clause. Respondent, mother, shall submit to a comprehensive forensic psychiatric evaluation conducted by a court-appointed expert selected from petitioner's approved list. Merritt read the clause, looked up, and actually let out a sharp laugh. It wasn't loud, but it echoed in the beige room. "Is something funny, counsel?" Desmond asked coldly. "You cannot demand a psychiatric evaluation conducted by your hand-picked doctor based entirely on a selectively edited, illegally recorded video of postpartum fatigue and call it concern for the child. It's entirely reasonable given Miss Mercer's documented emotional episodes," Desmond countered. Merritt tapped the binder. "You keep saying documented as if we aren't about to introduce the timestamps and the hotel receipts." Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "This doesn't have to be a bloodbath, Sutton." I looked at him. He looked genuinely tired, not the bone-deep exhaustion of a new parent, but the frantic, panicked exhaustion of a man who realized his consequences were finally catching up to him. "You filed the petition, Harrison," I said. "You started the bloodbath. I filed it because you refused to be reasonable. You filed it because I stopped being convenient." His eyes went dark. Blair instinctively put her hand on his shoulder. "Harrison, don't." It was a performance of submissive sweetness. She wanted the mediator to see her calming the erratic beast that I had supposedly agitated. I wondered if she knew how transparent she had become. Mr. Peterson folded his hands. "Miss Mercer, what would you consider a reasonable settlement?" Merritt opened her mouth, but I touched her sleeve. She nodded, yielding the floor. I spoke for myself. Primary physical custody remains with me. Harrison receives a step-up visitation schedule, initially supervised, expanding only upon consistent attendance and demonstrated ability to perform basic infant care. Blair Kensington is permanently barred from being present during his visitation while this case is open. Full financial discovery. Child support calculated to state maximums based on his total assets, including bonuses. All communication via a court app. And absolutely no non-disclosure agreement regarding his financial misconduct. Desmond shook his head violently. "Those are punitive measures. They are protective measures based entirely on his historical behavior," I shot back. Harrison let out a bitter, ugly laugh. "Because I moved on with my life?" I stared at him. "Moved on with your life? What a beautifully sanitized way to say you abandoned your bleeding, postpartum wife and feverish newborn to sleep in a suite at the Carlisle. You didn't move on, Harrison. You overlaid one life on top of another." The mediator's pen stopped moving. Blair's neck flushed red. Harrison leaned back, crossing his arms. "Do you just want to humiliate me on the record?" "No. I want the judge to see you clearly. If clarity humiliates you, you should look inward." For a second, it looked like he was going to flip the table. Then, Desmond slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "There is a significant financial offer attached," Desmond said smoothly. "A highly generous lump sum alimony buyout." Merritt reached for it, but Harrison pushed it directly toward me. I looked at the number. It was massive. 6 months ago, it would have paralyzed me with the sheer relief it promised. Rent. Formula. Pediatrician copays. A massive cushion against the financial terror Harrison had weaponized against me. Now, it looked exactly like what it was. Hush money. "You'd have freedom, Sutton," Harrison said, dropping his voice into that fake, intimate register. That was always when he was most dangerous. "You could rest. Hire a nanny. Rebuild your life. Auden will have both of us." "Both of us?" I asked. My eyes flicked to Blair. "Or all three of us?" I slid the paper back across the table. "No." Harrison's lips pinched into a white line. "Don't be an idiot." Merritt's head snapped up. Mr. Peterson warned. "Mr. Sterling." Harrison ignored him, leaning closer to me. "It's more money than you'll ever see if we go to trial. Do you honestly think because Daddy came back into your life, you're suddenly untouchable?" The room went dead silent. Merritt froze. I looked at Harrison with hyper-focused clarity. "How do you know I saw my father?" His expression slipped. A fraction of a second too late, he realized what he had just done. Blair looked at him in horror. Desmond Thorne closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. I almost smiled. There were only a few possibilities. Harrison had followed me. He had hired a private investigator to follow me. He had illegally accessed my GPS, or Blair had tapped into her Upper East Side gossip network. Any of those options played beautifully for me. Merritt's voice was lethal, perfectly calm ice. Has your client been tracking Miss Mercer's movements, Mr. Thorne? Absolutely not, Desmond snapped. He was guessing. He stated it as a fact, I said. Blair spoke up too quickly, trying to save him. Everyone knows your dad has money. It's obvious you'd go running back to him. I turned my head slowly toward her. I thought you told me he cut me off. Her mouth snapped shut. The room tilted. Not physically, but strategically. For the first time, Desmond Thorne looked genuinely enraged at his own clients. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat loudly. Perhaps we should take a recess. That won't be necessary, I said. I picked up Harrison's Mont Blanc pen from the table. For one desperate second, hope flared in his eyes. He thought I was going to sign the settlement. Instead, I wrote one word across the top of the first page in massive letters. Rejected. I dated it and slid it back to him. Harrison's face turned a mottled, furious red. You are going to regret this tomorrow, he snarled. Tomorrow, I replied, standing up. You are going to answer questions under oath. Blair stood up abruptly, her chair scraping. This is insane. No, I said. It's discovery. Desmond rapidly gathered his files. We'll see you in court. Harrison stayed in his chair for 1 second longer. He lowered his voice so only I could hear. When the judge watches that video of you screaming, Sutton, when she sees how unhinged you look. Don't say I didn't try to protect you. I thought of Brenda's medical charts. Mrs. Gallagher's ring footage. Chloe's testimony. Eleanor's recording. Blair's confession in the West Village. The bank statements. My father sitting in the gallery. My mother's trust fund. I looked Harrison dead in the eyes. You never tried to protect me, I said. You only tried to manage me. He stared at me like he was finally realizing those two things were not the same. I walked out with Merritt. In the hallway, my knees finally started to shake not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline crash. Merritt touched my elbow. You handled that flawlessly. I wanted to throw the water pitcher at his head. Wanting to do it is free, Merritt said dryly. Not doing it is strategy. I laughed, because if I didn't, I would have sobbed. Outside, my father's driver, Marcus, was waiting at the curb with the town car. My dad had insisted on sending him after deducing Harrison might be having me tailed. I had fought him on it for 10 minutes before accepting it, because pride is not safety, and Auden needed me safe. As I slid into the leather back seat, a text from Harrison came through. Last chance to settle today. I can still protect you from what happens next. I took a screenshot, then permanently blocked his number. For emergencies, he could email Merritt. For manipulation, he could talk to a wall. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom at my father's house, with Auden's travel crib set up next to my bed. The walls weren't pale purple anymore. The posters were gone. The girl I used to be was gone too. But on the bookshelf by the window was the small wooden music box my mother had given me when I turned 12. I wound it up once. The tinny melody tinkled in the quiet room. Auden slept soundly. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Not because I was dreading court, but because tomorrow, Harrison would walk into that room utterly convinced I was alone. I wanted to memorize the exact look on his face when he realized the truth. The second day of the trial felt fundamentally different. Not lighter, but sharper. The air felt like a drawn blade. Day one had been Harrison's fiction. Emotional instability. Financial dependence. Bitter wife. Overwhelmed mother. Perfect provider. Day two was our reality check. Timestamps. Receipts. Bank wires. Witnesses. I arrived early with Auden. I wore a navy blue sheath dress my mother had bought me years ago for a summer in the Hamptons. My hair was pulled back, my heels were low, and my posture was iron. Merritt was waiting for me past the metal detectors. She was flanked by a paralegal pushing a cart loaded with 4 massive exhibit binders. She looked so ferociously calm it made my spine automatically straighten. Ready? She asked. No. Good. People who think they are ready make sloppy mistakes. I laughed softly. Then I saw Harrison. He was standing near the courtroom doors with Desmond. Blair was sitting on a wooden bench nearby, holding a cardboard coffee cup and scrolling on her phone. Today she was wearing pale blue, softer than the cream, more maternal, less mistress. Someone had definitely coached her on optics. Harrison watched me approach. His eyes swept over my shoulders, looking behind me. No father. No visible support system. The corners of his mouth relaxed into a faint, arrogant smirk. In that moment, I knew he still implicitly believed his own narrative. My father had entered the courthouse through a side entrance 15 minutes earlier with Merritt's co-counsel. He was already sitting in the second row of the gallery, directly behind the respondent's table, partially obscured by a marble pillar until the room filled up. He wasn't going to approach me in the hall. He wasn't going to make a scene. He was doing exactly what I had asked. He was standing behind me. Blair looked up from her phone as I passed. "Brave," she murmured. "I assumed you'd run." I paused. "I assumed you'd think of Auden. I am thinking of her." Harrison took a step toward me. "Sutton, we can still settle this through the lawyers right now." His jaw tightened. "Stop hiding behind your attorney." I glanced at Blair. Interesting advice from a man currently hiding behind his affair partner. Merritt let out a sound that was a cough wrapped in a laugh. Harrison's face darkened. "You are going to burn this down until there's nothing left to save. There is nothing left between us to save." For the first time, I said it without a single ounce of grief. The bailiff opened the heavy wooden doors. We filed inside. The gallery filled up slowly with law students and other attorneys waiting for their calendar calls. Eleanor Sterling walked in a few minutes later, looking pale and furious, taking a seat 2 rows behind Harrison. She actively avoided making eye contact with me. I wondered if she knew the MP3 file of our lunch was already sitting in Merritt's binder. Blair took her seat directly behind Harrison, though she looked slightly less confident than yesterday. My father sat directly behind me. I could feel his presence without turning around. It was astonishing how heavy silent support could feel, and how thoroughly it altered the gravity of a room. Judge Hayes took the bench at exactly 9 a.m. Auden was out in the hall in a private witness waiting room with Martha. We had decided it was best not to have her inside during the brutal testimony. Harrison had loudly complained to his lawyer when he saw Martha take her. "How convenient," he had muttered. The judge began by summarizing where we left off. Petitioner has introduced evidence alleging the respondent's emotional instability and lack of support. Respondent's counsel indicated they will provide context and rebuttal. "Miss Caldwell, call your first witness." Merritt stood up. "Thank you, Your Honor." The respondent calls Alaric Mercer. The atmospheric pressure in the room visibly violently shifted before my father even stood up. Eleanor was the first to whip her head around. Then Harrison looked past me, his eyes landing on the second row, and I saw the exact, terrifying second he recognized the man sitting there. He didn't just recognize a person, he recognized a catastrophic miscalculation. My father stood up slowly, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket. He didn't do it for dramatic effect. He did it because he did everything deliberately. He walked down the center aisle and stepped into the witness box. Nobody gasped real life. Rarely has a soundtrack, but the silence became so dense, it rang in my ears. I heard Blair whisper, "Oh my God." All the blood drained from Harrison's face. He looked like a corpse. Desmond leaned over and hissed, "You told me her father cut her off. That's Alaric Mercer." Harrison couldn't speak. I kept my eyes locked forward, but deep inside my chest, something old, bruised, and defensive finally uncoiled. Not because my father was powerful or wealthy, but because Harrison had banked his entire strategy on my utter isolation, and the mere sight of a man standing up to defend me shattered his reality. My father was sworn in. Merritt approached the podium. "Please state your name for the record." "Alaric Mercer." "Mr. Mercer, what is your relationship to the respondent, Sutton Mercer?" "She is my daughter." The word fell softly, but with massive weight. Daughter. For years, Harrison had made me feel like an ex-daughter, a difficult child, a runaway too stubborn to ask for directions. My father said the word like not a single day had passed. "Are you aware of the nature of these proceedings?" "I am." "When did Miss Len Mercer contact you regarding this custody dispute?" My father looked at me briefly. "Recently, not because my support was unavailable, but because she had been systematically conditioned to believe she wasn't allowed to ask for it." Desmond Thorne shot out of his chair. "Objection." Speculation. Hearsay. Sustained, Judge Hayes said, though she was watching my father closely. Mr. Mercer, please limit your answers to the facts. My father nodded respectfully. As a matter of fact, my home, my staff, and my resources are permanently at my daughter and granddaughter's disposal. There is a permanent residence available. There is childcare available. There is financial backing available. Merritt handed him an exhibit folder. Do you recognize this document? Yes. It is an irrevocable trust established by my late wife for Sutton. When was it established? 8 years ago. Prior to her marriage to Mr. Sterling. Does Miss Mercer have unencumbered access to these funds? She does. Harrison looked like he had swallowed broken glass. Merritt submitted the trust document into evidence. Mr. Mercer, have you ever refused to support your daughter financially or emotionally? No. Did you ask Miss Mercer to let you take over this legal battle? No. What did she ask of you? My father looked directly at me. She asked me to stand behind her, not in front of her. The words hit me like a physical hand pressing firmly between my shoulder blades. Merritt nodded. Why is your presence here today relevant to this court? Because Harrison Sterling's entire petition rests on the fabrication that my daughter is destitute and alone, my father said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. She is the only parent who has actually cared for that child. My role today is simply to prove that she is not defenseless. Desmond Thorne stood up for cross-examination, looking significantly less smug than he had 24 hours ago. Mr. Mercer, isn't it true that you and your daughter were entirely estranged for 3 years? It is. So your sudden support is a very recent development. My physical presence in this courtroom is recent. My willingness to support my child is not. You were not present for the birth of your granddaughter. I was not informed she was in labor. Harrison looked down at his lap. You didn't know her living conditions. You don't know the child's routine. This is a very convenient time to play grandpa, isn't it? My father stared at Desmond with the blank, terrifying calm of an apex predator. I would call it overdue. A few law students in the back row shifted uncomfortably. Judge Hayes didn't move her mouth, but her eyes narrowed in agreement. Desmond tried one last angle. Isn't it true, Mr. Mercer, that your vast wealth gives your daughter an artificial advantage in this proceeding? My wealth does not wake up at 3 a.m. to feed an infant, my father said softly. Sutton does. The courtroom went dead still. My throat closed so violently I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. My wealth does not know what brand of formula Auden drinks, my father continued relentlessly. It does not know her pediatrician's name. It does not know her vaccine schedule, or how to soothe her colic. Sutton does. My resources can fund an environment counselor, but they do not substitute for a mother. Merritt wasn't smiling, but I could feel her absolute triumph radiating from the chair next to me. Desmond had no further questions. When my father stepped down from the stand, he didn't pat my shoulder or look for my validation. He didn't need to. He walked right back to the gallery and sat directly behind me. Harrison stared at the plaintiff's table. Blair stared at Harrison. Eleanor Sterling stared at me, as if she was finally realizing she was trapped on the wrong side of a locked door. Call your next witness, miss. Caldwell, Judge Hayes said, turning a page. Merritt stood. We call Brenda Lewis. Harrison's head snapped up. He didn't know the name, but he was about to. Nurse Brenda walked to the stand wearing her dark blue scrubs and practical clogs, carrying the quiet authority of a woman who routinely watches grown men pass out at the sight of blood and then try to take credit for the baby. She was sworn in and sat down, refusing to look at Harrison. Merritt established her credentials, then moved fast. Were you the attending triage and recovery nurse when Miss Mercer delivered Auden? I was. Can you detail the timeline of the birth? Brenda read from the chart. Patient admitted at 4:10 a.m. Unaccompanied. Husband listed as primary support person. Patient attempted contact 6 times. Labor progressed. Infant delivered at 3:45 p.m. Husband arrived approximately 3 hours post-delivery. Harrison physically shrank in his chair. Did you observe, miss? Mercer interacting with the newborn? Yes. She was exhausted, bleeding heavily, but highly attentive and bonded. Merritt handed Brenda a printed screenshot of the infamous crying video. Nurse Lewis, earlier, opposing counsel showed a video of my client crying, claiming it proved instability. As a medical professional, is a mother crying from exhaustion postpartum evidence of unfitness? Brenda looked at the paper, then directly at the judge. Absolutely not. What does it prove? In my professional experience, it proves she was severely sleep-deprived and lacking basic spousal support. Merritt nodded. Did Mr. Sterling ask you about postpartum mental health? Yes. The morning after delivery, he approached the desk and asked how postpartum emotional episodes were documented legally, and if they could be subpoenaed for custody purposes. A collective, horrified murmur ran through the gallery. Judge Hayes's head snapped toward Harrison. Merritt let the silence hang. Did you document any concerns that Miss Mercer was a danger to her child? None. Zero. Desmond tried to cross-examine her by suggesting she was just naturally sympathetic to mothers. Brenda shut him down. I am sympathetic to safe infant care, counselor, and I observed Miss Mercer providing it alone. Next was Chloe, the doula. She was younger than I remembered, nervously twisting her rings, but her testimony was fatal. She detailed the labeled bottles, the emergency contacts on the fridge. My meticulous organization despite physical burnout. Did you observe Mr. Sterling caring for the baby? Merritt asked. Only for photo opportunities, Chloe said bluntly. He usually handed her right back if she fussed. He didn't know where the formula was kept. He didn't know her diaper size. When I corrected his neck support hold, he became highly aggressive. Desmond objected. Overruled. Then came Mrs. Gallagher. She wore a purple cardigan and her reading glasses on a pearl chain. When asked about her relationship to the parties, she leaned into the microphone. I lived beneath them, which means I heard more than I wanted to, and saw far more than Mr. Sterling assumed I did. Someone in the back actually laughed. Judge Hayes looked down at her notes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Mrs. Gallagher authenticated the Ring camera videos. Exhibit A. Blair sneaking in while I was at a Lamaze class. Exhibit B. Blair leaving at dawn. Exhibit C. Harrison kissing Blair in the hallway. Exhibit D. Me struggling with the stroller, diaper bag, and groceries while Auden screamed, while Harrison walked right past me, talking on his cell phone, and went into the apartment without holding the door. I didn't know the last video existed until Merritt showed it to me in prep. Watching it in open court was infinitely more painful than watching him kiss Blair. The kiss was betrayal. Walking past his struggling wife was pure, unadulterated contempt. That's how it was, Mrs. Gallagher's voice echoed from the stand. She carried everything. He only carried himself. I stared down at my hands. Then came the financials. Merritt entered the bank wires, the Carlyle receipts, the Cartier purchases, and the stylist invoices into evidence. Desmond objected frantically, claiming it was irrelevant to custody. Merritt fired back. Petitioner made financial stability and providing for the child the core of his argument. He claimed my client was broke. We are demonstrating that he was systematically draining marital funds to subsidize his mistress, who he is now attempting to install as a primary caregiver. It goes directly to his judgment and his financial credibility. The judge allowed it. Every dollar amount read aloud ripped another brick out of Harrison's Greenwich mansion. Then, Merritt introduced the audio recordings. She only played the relevant clips. First, Blair in the West Village Cafe. Harrison can give Auden more. A mother figure who isn't drowning. Someone who isn't sobbing on the floor. Blair went ghost white in the gallery. Desmond jumped up. Your Honor, miss. Kensington was unaware she was being recorded in New York. New York is a one-party consent state, Merritt shot back. Furthermore, Miss Kensington is seated in this courtroom as the proposed trusted third-party childcare provider in Mr. Sterling's home. Her intent to replace the biological mother and coordinate a gaslighting campaign is highly relevant. Judge Hayes allowed it. Next was Eleanor's recording. Auden is a Sterling. She belongs to a legacy. Sometimes loving a child means knowing when to step aside. Eleanor closed her eyes. Harrison looked back at his mother in absolute disbelief, as if her betrayal was only offensive now that it hurt his legal standing. But the final nail in the coffin was Harrison's own text messages, obtained via subpoena during discovery. Merritt displayed a screenshot on the monitor. Blair. That video of her crying helps. She looks insane. Harrison. It's not enough on its own. Blair. Then make her spiral over text. Stop answering her calls and let her freak out in writing. Harrison. Careful. Blair. I am being careful. You should be too if you want Auden at the Greenwich House. The courtroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Not a judicial silence, a deeply human one. The kind of silence that occurs when a monster is finally dragged out from under the bed into the daylight. Harrison half stood from his chair. That is taken entirely out of context. Judge Hayes's gavel slammed down like a gunshot. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. He sat. Blair stared at the monitor like she could magically rearrange the pixels. Merritt walked to the podium. The respondent calls Blair Kensington as a hostile witness. Blair was forced onto the stand. She was trembling. Merritt didn't yell. She spoke with lethal softness. She established the timeline of the affair. She established Blair's presence in the marital home. Then she pointed to the text message. Did you advise Mr. Sterling to ignore his wife's desperate pleas for help regarding a sick infant, specifically to manufacture written evidence of her emotional distress? Blair swallowed hard. It was a private conversation. Yes or no, Miss Kensington? Yes. Did you suggest letting her spiral? I didn't mean it like that. What exactly did you mean? Blair looked at Harrison. He refused to look back at her. That was the moment she finally understood. Men like Harrison Sterling do not share lifeboats. When the ship goes down, they throw you overboard to lighten the load. I was angry, Blair cried, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. Because she was interfering with our relationship. Because she was using the baby. Using the baby? Merritt asked. How? By asking him to attend pediatric appointments? By asking him to answer the phone when the child had a 102-degree fever? Blair's mouth opened and closed. I loved him. The gallery collectively exhaled. There it was. Not Auden's best interests. Not my stability. I loved him. Merritt dropped her voice. You wanted Miss Mercer out of the way so you could play house in Greenwich. You explicitly plotted to frame a postpartum mother as medically unstable. Harrison told me she was crazy, Blair shrieked, pointing at him. Every head turned to Harrison. His face was a mask of sheer panic. Blair realized, much too late, what she had just confessed to on the record. No further questions, Merritt said. Harrison was recalled to the stand. He walked to the chair like a man approaching a guillotine he had built himself. Merritt was brief and surgical. Did you deliberately ignore Miss Mercer's calls to create a written record of distress? No. Merritt pointed to the text messages. You replied, careful. You didn't say no. Harrison had no answer. Merritt stepped closer. Mr. Sterling, what brand of formula does Auden drink? Desmond stood up. Asked and answered in mediation. Your Honor. This is badgering. I'll allow it, Judge Hayes said, glaring at Harrison. Answer the question. Harrison swallowed. I don't know the exact brand. What size diaper does she wear? I'm not sure. Who is her pediatrician? He remembered the first name, but not the last. When is her next round of vaccinations? Silence. Merritt closed her binder. Nothing further. The judge called a recess to review the evidence before issuing a ruling. I sat at the table, completely unable to move. Merritt patted my arm. You did beautifully. I barely spoke. You didn't need to. The truth spoke for you. Across the aisle, Harrison was violently whispering at Desmond. Blair was sitting alone behind him, crying into a tissue. Nobody was consoling her. Eleanor stared blankly at the floor. My father stood silently behind me. I turned my head slightly. For a second, my father's eyes met mine. I wasn't in a courtroom anymore. I was 12 years old, sitting at the piano, rushing the final notes, and his steady voice was anchoring me in the room. Again. But slower. Don't rush the ending. I turned back around and waited. Judge Hayes returned 43 minutes later. I counted them. My body was still too well trained in waiting. Merritt sat next to me, her hands folded. Harrison sat across the aisle, his face set in a rigid, terrifying mask of denial. Blair had moved one seat further away from him. Eleanor clutched her Chanel bag in her lap. My father remained behind me. Judge Hayes spoke with measured, precise, legal language. Family court language is inherently sterile. It wraps broken lives in bureaucratic terms. Parenting time, temporary orders, best interests of the child, continuity of care. But beneath the polished vocabulary, the verdict was devastatingly clear. Primary physical and legal custody of Auden remained solely with me. Harrison was granted limited, highly structured visitation, strictly supervised by a court-appointed professional for the first 6 months. Any expansion of his rights required consistent attendance, completion of parenting classes, and demonstrated competency in infant care. Blair Kensington was explicitly barred from being present during any of Harrison's visitation time, permanently. All communication was restricted to the Our Family Wizard app. Harrison was ordered to pay maximum state guideline child support, retroactive to the date of separation, plus my entire legal fee burden. The court ordered a full forensic accounting of his business assets due to the credible evidence of financial dissipation and marital fraud. The request for my psychiatric evaluation was dismissed with prejudice. I heard the words. I processed the legal mechanics, but my nervous system refused to believe it immediately. Surviving Harrison had trained me to constantly brace for the hidden cost, the sudden punishment, the trapdoor. But there was no trapdoor. There was only the judge's voice, Merritt's calm breathing, and the sound of Harrison's chair scraping the floor as he slumped like a man whose spine had been removed. Judge Hayes looked directly at Harrison. This court is not here to punish infidelity, Mr. Sterling. But when a parent's behavior during and after a marriage directly endangers the welfare of a child, and when that parent actively attempts to manipulate the court by manufacturing evidence of the primary caregiver's mental instability, this court takes severe notice. Your actions demonstrate a profound lack of judgment and an alarming disregard for your infant daughter's actual needs. Harrison's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. Judge Hayes turned to me. Miss Mercer, the court recognizes the immense burden you have carried as the sole provider of care for this child. The court also recognizes the overwhelming evidence of your stability, your resilience, and your permanent support system. Support system, not a bailout, not pity. Support. I blinked rapidly, the tears finally burning my eyes. This order is effective immediately. We are adjourned. The gavel cracked. The impact was final. I stood up because Merritt stood up. For a few seconds, my legs felt entirely detached from my body. Merritt leaned in. Breathe. Sutton. I took a ragged breath. Across the aisle, Harrison turned toward me. His face had completely shattered. The arrogant rage was gone, replaced by naked, visceral panic. Not panic over losing, Auden panic over losing control. Sutton, he pleaded. Merritt stepped smoothly between us. All communication goes through counsel, Mr. Sterling. He ignored her. Please. That word. Please. It sounded so alien coming from his mouth after 2 years of demands disguised as advice. I looked at him. I watched his eyes dart nervously toward the gallery, where my father was standing up. Then Harrison looked at Blair, who was staring at the floor, ruined and weeping. He lowered his voice. Can we just talk outside? Just us? No. This got completely out of hand. No. I corrected him. It finally came to light. His face twisted in agony. Do you think you won? I looked toward the hallway doors, where Martha was waiting with Auden. Yes, I said quietly. But not the way you think. He took a desperate step toward me. Merritt raised a hand in warning. Harrison stopped. I made mistakes, he whispered. I was confused. I was. Overwhelmed. I almost laughed. Overwhelmed. The exact word he had used to pathologize my postpartum depression was now seeking shelter in his own mouth. Were you overwhelmed by the infant you never bothered to hold? I asked. A flash of the old defense mechanism flared in his eyes. The marriage. The pressure at work. Your constant suspicions. And there it was. The ultimate failure to take accountability, disguised in passive voice. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical pity. You didn't accidentally trip and fall into a suite at the Carlisle, Harrison. You weren't pressured into wiring marital funds to pay Blair's rent. You didn't accidentally record me crying instead of picking up your daughter. You didn't accidentally file a fraudulent custody petition. You made calculated choices. Every single step of the way. He flushed deep red. Blair appeared behind him, her mascara smeared down her cheeks. Harrison, she sobbed. He turned on her with vicious speed. Shut up. Blair recoiled like she'd been struck. For a split second, I saw her entire future. Not the perfect Hamptons photos, not the renovated nursery, not the cream cashmere. I saw her desperate, clinging guilt, searching for a new host to infect. Blair looked at me, her lips trembling. He told me your marriage was over. I held her gaze for a long time. Another woman might have found deep satisfaction in her destruction. I only found clarity. And you believed him? I said softly. Because it gave you exactly what you wanted. She flinched, pulling her coat tight. I owed her zero comfort. Eleanor Sterling approached, rigid and pale. Sutton, she said. Her voice brittle. For Auden's sake, we should all calm down. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. For Auden's sake, Eleanor, you can all comply with the court order. Her lips thinned into a razor blade. You know I love my granddaughter. You love the idea of her belonging to your crest, I replied. But she is a human being. Not a legacy project. Eleanor had absolutely nothing to say to that. Then, my father stepped forward. He didn't stand in front of me. He stood just close enough for Harrison to feel the gravitational pull. Harrison looked at my father with the expression of a boy who had spent his life talking about power, finally coming face to face with the silent, terrifying reality of it. Alaric, Harrison said stiffly. I think emotions are running high. We all just want what's best. My father looked down at him. No. You wanted what was convenient. Harrison's jaw tightened. With all due respect, sir, this is between me and Sutton. It ceased being just between you, the second you attempted to steal her child by weaponizing her isolation. Harrison was the first to break eye contact, looking away, defeated. That should have satisfied some dark, vengeful part of my soul, but it didn't. I didn't want Harrison to live in cinematic humiliation forever. I wanted something much colder and much more permanent. I wanted him to be completely irrelevant to my peace. Down the hallway, Martha appeared holding Auden. My daughter was awake, chewing on her fist, her wide, serious eyes scanning the chaotic courthouse corridor. I walked toward her. The second I took her into my arms, the ambient noise of the building faded into static. Hi, baby, I whispered into her soft hair. We're going home. Home. For months, that word had meant a Greenwich estate where I cried in the shower so Harrison could sleep. It meant a pristine nursery he only entered if someone was watching. It meant a kitchen sink where I found lipstick on a wine glass and tried to convince myself that love didn't leave stains. Now, home meant something entirely different. For a while, it would mean a bedroom in my father's house in Westchester, a travel crib by a window, a signed court order in a locked drawer, a future that no longer revolved around managing Harrison Sterling's moods. Outside the courthouse, the winter air was so sharp it stung my lungs. There were no reporters, no public spectacles, no crowds cheering for justice. Life rarely provides a soundtrack for survival. People rushed past us with their oat milk lattes, their briefcases, their parking tickets, and their own private disasters. Harrison followed me down the concrete steps. Sutton, he called out. Merritt turned, ready to attack, but I touched her arm. It's okay. I turned to face him. He was standing 2 steps above me, as if his body was still subconsciously seeking the high ground. I don't want to lose my daughter, he said, his voice breaking. Then learn how to actually be her father. His face crumpled. I can. I will. But you don't have to cut me out completely. I'm not cutting you out. The court gave you a supervised, necessary path back to her. He swallowed hard, the wind whipping his expensive tie over his shoulder. What about us? The question hung suspended in the freezing New York air. Us. There had been an us once. I wasn't going to rewrite history and pretend there hadn't been. There had been Sunday mornings making burnt pancakes, impulsive road trips up the coast, and terrible diner coffee. There had been nights early in our marriage when Harrison held my hand and I foolishly believed that being chosen by him meant I was safe. But a memory is not a contract. Love doesn't erase the damage just because it existed first. There is no us anymore, Harrison. His eyes flooded with sudden, shocked tears. For the first time, I wondered if he genuinely hadn't believed it was over until this exact second. I got confused, he whispered miserably. I shook my head. You made choices. Blair walked out of the revolving doors behind him. She looked at Harrison, then at me, and finally at Auden. For one fleeting second, her gaze softened into something resembling regret. Or maybe envy. Or maybe she was just mentally calculating the cost of a new PR strategy. I didn't care. Harrison reached a hand out toward me, stopping inches from my coat. I took one single step back. The entirety of our ending was contained in that one tiny movement. He understood. His hand dropped to his side. My father's town car was idling at the curb. Merritt tapped the folder containing the court order and gave me a proud, tired smile. My father opened the rear door of the car and stepped back, allowing me to get in first. Not guiding me, not controlling me, just giving me space. Before I slid into the leather seat, I looked at the courthouse one last time. I had walked into that building carrying my daughter, surrounded by people who were absolutely certain I was alone. I was walking out with my daughter, with my maiden name, with my evidence, with my father standing securely behind me, and with myself entirely, irreversibly reclaimed. 3 months later, the temporary order became the foundation for the permanent custody agreement. Harrison completed his court-mandated parenting classes because he had to. He attended his supervised visits, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with flashes of genuine effort, but always under the watchful eye of a social worker. He learned what brand of formula Auden drank when it was no longer a trap in a deposition. He learned her nap schedule because a judge forced him to prove it. The forensic accounting forced him to reimburse the marital estate for the funds he'd spent on Blair. His hedge fund didn't collapse, but his pristine reputation in his social circle took a permanent, quiet hit. Men like Harrison fear accountability far more than they fear scandal. Scandals fade. Accountability leaves a paper trail. Blair Kensington moved out of the West Village before spring. I heard through the grapevine that she blamed Harrison for ruining her life. I believed her. I also knew she blamed me. I didn't reply to the midnight email she sent me 6 weeks after the trial, the one with the subject line, "Woman to woman. I think you should know." I deleted it unread. Woman to woman hadn't mattered to her when I was bleeding in a hospital bed, and it certainly didn't matter to me now that she was losing. Eleanor Sterling requested visitation through the court app using language so rigidly polite it practically cracked the screen. I permitted supervised grandmother visits only when they didn't disrupt Auden's schedule. The first time Eleanor saw Auden after the ruling, she cried. I watched her from across the room without softening. Tears can be grief, but they can also be a negotiation tactic. My father and I didn't magically transform into a flawless television family. We argued about the thermostat, the volume of the baby monitor, and whether Auden needed to wear socks indoors. He bought way too many expensive wooden toys. I told him we weren't raising her for a Montessori catalog. He argued that plastic toys sounded like corporate training videos. But slowly, carefully, we were learning how to know each other again. One evening in May, after Auden had gone to sleep, I found my father in the library, sitting at the Steinway. He had removed the cream dust cover. "You opened it," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "You used to play it when you were angry," he noted. "I played terribly when I was angry. I always rushed the ending." He smiled softly. He sat on the bench and pressed a single ivory key. The note hung in the quiet room. "I was thinking about what you said to me," he murmured. "Behind you, not in front of you. I meant it." "I know. I am trying, Sutton. I know you are." He looked toward the staircase, where Auden was sleeping safely in the room that used to be mine. "You are a profoundly good mother." The sentence hit me without warning. I had to look down at the floorboards because my eyes filled too fast. "Thank you. You were a good mother before the trial, too," he added gently. That was the piece I had desperately needed to hear. Not that I was a good mother now that I had won, but that I had been a good mother back in the dark, before I ever had to prove it to a judge. In June, I moved into a small, beautiful house 10 minutes away from my father's estate. Not because I had to leave, but because I could. It had a navy blue front door, a kitchen that flooded with morning sunlight, and a nursery that smelled of fresh paint and lavender detergent. Mrs. Gallagher sent a massive potted monstera. Nurse Brenda sent a card. Chloe the doula came over for coffee and cried when Auden giggled at her earrings. Merritt mailed me the finalized, judge-signed custody decree with a single sticky note attached. "You did the hardest part. The law just finally caught up with you." On our first night in the new house, I carried Auden from room to room in the quiet dusk. "This is the kitchen," I whispered to her. This is where I will inevitably burn pancakes and pretend it's rustic. She waved a chubby fist. This is the living room. This is where we will keep your books. Not the pristine ones nobody touches. The ones you chew on. Auden hiccuped. And this, I said, stepping into the nursery, is your room. Her crib sat near a large bay window. A mobile spun lazily above it. Not the overpriced Bloomingdale's one I had assembled, while Harrison texted his mistress. A new one, made of little wooden stars, moons, and birds that my father had carefully picked out after losing an argument about whether infants appreciate fine craftsmanship. I laid Auden down on the mattress. She blinked up at me, sleepy and entirely trusting. I thought of the sterile courtroom, Blair's lipstick, Harrison's tailored suit, my father standing up in the gallery behind me, the judge's gavel, and the steady sound of my own voice when I finally said, there was no us anymore. People think the moment of ultimate victory is loud. Mine was completely silent. It was my daughter falling asleep in a room that no one could ever use fear to take away from us. It was my phone charging on the nightstand, refusing to light up with Harrison's name. It was the heavy court order locked safely in a desk drawer, not because I wanted to live inside the war forever, but because I had earned the absolute right to keep the proof that I survived it. I stood by the crib until Auden's breathing grew deep and rhythmic. Then I walked out to the hallway, went to the front door, and looked out at the quiet, tree-lined street for a long time. There was no Harrison idling in the driveway, no Blair hovering in the periphery, no Eleanor dictating the terms of a legacy, no voice whispering in my ear, telling me to be realistic. Be careful, be grateful, be quiet. I closed the heavy navy door, turned the deadbolt with a solid click, and shut off the porch light. And for the first time in my entire adult life, the silence of my home didn't feel like abandonment. It felt exactly like peace.